Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip into the cold. And I don't mean the kind where you bundle up in a hoodie and complain about your heating bill. No, I mean cold that gets into your bones, your soul, and pretty much ruins everything you thought you could tolerate. We're diving into why medieval winters were so brutally hard to survive. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't make it past December. Before we get too deep into the frostbite, go ahead and like the video, subscribe if you enjoy these little nighttime miseries, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how cold it is where you are right now. Bonus points if you're under a mountain of blankets. Now, dim the lights, maybe pull that extra comforter up to your chin, and let's drift into a world where winter wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Congratulations, you've just been dropped into medieval Europe, sometime around the year 1320. It's winter. That might sound cosy, like a charming snow globe scene, maybe with a warm fire flickering in a stone hearth, and the distant ringing of church bells cutting through crisp air. Yeah, no, that's not what this is. You're about to discover what winter really meant back then. A slow, relentless campaign waged by nature to remind you who's in charge. You blink awake inside a tiny wooden structure that someone charitably calls a home. The air is bitter and cuts at your face before you've even sat up. Your breath fogs instantly, little white puffs drifting in front of your eyes like ghosts of better decisions. You try to pull your blanket tighter, but the thin, scratchy wool barely counts as insulation. It's stiff from moisture that never really leaves. The cold has found its way through every hole, every seam, every invisible crack in the walls. There is no escape. The mattress beneath you, if you can call it that, is a half-rotten sack of straw, lumpy, damp, and probably sharing its limited warmth with fleas, lice, and a mouse or two. You can hear them scratching softly beneath you, probably irritated that your body heat hasn't kept things warm enough for their liking. The straw reeks faintly of mildew and old sweat, and at some point last night, one corner of it froze solid. Your first breath of the day tastes like wood smoke, goat droppings, and despair. There's no central heating here, no radiators humming, no thermostat to click up a few notches because your toes are cold. There is only whatever embers remain from last night's fire, now reduced to a few faintly glowing coals, trying to pretend they're still relevant. You are 25 years old, which in this era makes you something of a seasoned veteran at surviving winters, if barely. Your skin is dry and cracked from endless exposure to freezing winds. Your joints ache constantly, like they've been hollowed out and filled with icy gravel. You pull your knees up to your chest instinctively, trying to conserve heat, but the movement only reminds you of how stiff your muscles are. Your knuckles are chapped and bleeding slightly, and you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. The roof overhead groans with the weight of snow piled high from last night's storm. It's thatched, of course, which means the insulation value is practically imaginary. The cold comes straight through it as though the roof is politely stepping aside to allow the winter in. Occasionally, a puff of fine snow sifts down between the gaps, dusting the dirt floor in delicate white powder, like a cruel joke trying to make your misery look festive. There's no glass in the windows. Glass exists, but not for you. Instead, small holes in the walls are covered with thin cloth or oiled parchment, which flutter uselessly whenever the wind howls, and the wind howls often. You don't sleep through winter nights so much as endure them in shallow, anxious naps, between each fresh gust rattling the wooden walls. But dawn has come, or at least some pale, anemic version of it. The sky outside glows a sickly grey. The sun is somewhere up there, technically, but its presence is more theoretical than functional. You can hear your family beginning to stir. Your wife, your 2 children, your ageing mother, all crammed together in the single-room structure. Privacy doesn't exist here. You share everything: warmth, space, breath, and illness. You sit up carefully. Your back protests immediately. Your entire body feels like it belongs to someone twice your age. That's what repeated winters do. The cold doesn't simply visit, it moves in, takes over your joints, your skin, your lungs, your bones. You are its reluctant landlord. Your feet hit the dirt floor, which greets them with a kind of biting chill that makes you wince instinctively. No slippers. No socks thick enough to matter. Just rough, hand-spun wool wrapped around your ankles, damp from last night's melted snow seeping in. The floor itself is uneven. Hardened mud mixed with straw, and layers of grime that build up season after season, because washing anything in winter is laughably difficult. The fire has all but died. You poke at the cold ash with a stick, hoping to find a hidden ember that can be coaxed back to life. Nothing. Just cold, grey disappointment. Starting a new fire means you'll have to burn more wood, which is its own problem. Firewood is precious. Not just because it keeps you warm, but because legally you're not allowed to gather it freely. The forests belong to your lord, and poaching firewood can earn you a fine, a beating, or worse. So every log burned is counted, hoarded, and stretched as far as possible. You glance at your wife. She's still lying on her side, huddled beneath a stiff blanket, her breath clouding the air as she whispers quiet morning prayers. Your youngest child stirs beside her, instinctively curling closer to his mother's body for warmth. Your eldest, barely 5 years old, is already awake, sitting silently with wide, sleepy eyes, too cold to cry, too tired to smile. The skin on his cheeks is cracked and red from yesterday's windburn. And yet, this is a relatively good morning. No one died in the night. The roof didn't collapse under the weight of snow. The bitter wind hasn't knocked the hut entirely off its crooked foundation. Small victories. You can hear your neighbour outside, already up, breaking through the ice crust that formed overnight on the communal well. The sharp crack of iron against frozen water echoes across the quiet village, a reminder that your turn to fetch water will come soon enough. You breathe in again, filling your lungs with cold air so sharp it feels like tiny knives slicing through your throat. Every breath in winter feels dangerous, like you might draw in something that freezes inside you and refuses to leave. Coughs turn into fevers quickly here. Fevers turn into funerals. You rub your hands together briskly, trying to summon circulation back into your fingers. The skin is so dry that it flakes like old parchment. The cracks along your knuckles sting with every movement. You look down at your hands, rough, battered, swollen, and briefly remember that they once looked younger. They don't anymore. Outside, the snow crunches beneath your neighbour's boots as he trudges past your hut, his breath steaming in front of him like smoke from an extinguished chimney. His shoulders are hunched beneath layers of ragged wool, his face mostly hidden beneath a fraying hood. You offer a nod as your eyes meet for a brief moment through the hole in your wall. No words are exchanged. None are necessary. It's too cold for words. You know you can't sit here much longer. The longer you hesitate, the colder the room seems to become, as if the winter senses your weakness and doubles its efforts. Hesitation in winter isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. The body stiffens, muscles lock, joints freeze. The cold has patience, and it plays the long game. Slowly, you push yourself up onto your feet. The dirt floor sends a pulse of icy shock straight through your legs. You shift your weight instinctively to avoid stepping on the brittle patch of frozen mud that developed overnight. The moisture from yesterday's melting snow crept in through the walls again, only to solidify once the fire died, leaving thin sheets of frost that crackle beneath every movement. You shuffle towards the door, which groans under its own warped frame. The wood swells and contracts constantly with the freeze-thaw cycle, so every winter morning becomes a battle just to open it. You brace your shoulder against a heavy plank, pushing with slow, deliberate force until it finally yields with a loud pop, sending a fine flurry of snow into your face like an unwelcome greeting. The outside world is no better. In fact, it's worse. The wind strikes immediately, biting any exposed skin, slicing into the folds of your rough tunic, as though it isn't even there. The landscape is blanketed in several feet of snow, but it's not the pure, soft kind that modern postcards romanticize. It's heavy, wet, and angry, crusted over with icy layers that crunch and fracture underfoot. The drifts are lumpy and uneven, hardened by countless storms that packed the snow into dense, unforgiving slabs. Your breath comes out in thick plumes, spiralling upward and vanishing into the grey sky. The village is unnervingly quiet, except for the occasional groan of overloaded rooftops, the whisper of wind through skeletal trees, and the steady creak of the well as your neighbour hauls up his frozen prize. The cold isn't just a temperature, it's a character in this story, one that's always present, always watching, always looking for an opportunity to slip beneath your skin. It wraps itself around you, slides between the fibres of your woolen layers, settles into your marrow. You feel its weight in your bones, in your jaw that refuses to unclench, in your shoulders that instinctively hunch as though that might somehow protect you. You scan the sky instinctively, studying the colour of the clouds, thick, low, and bruised with shades of iron. More snow is coming. Of course it is. The winter never arrives once and leaves. It circles you, returns, lingers, and piles misery upon misery with cruel consistency. You make your way to the small shed where your precious wood supply is stacked. The path is barely visible, marked only by faint footprints, quickly filling with drifting snow. Every step requires deliberate effort. The snow clutches at your boots, threatens to steal them with each movement, pulling at the worn leather like a jealous lover. The woodpile greets you like a bank account you know is dangerously low. You've rationed carefully, but winter always lasts longer than you think. Always. What was once a healthy stack in late autumn now stands pathetically reduced, exposing gaps where logs once sat. Every missing log is a day you've already survived, but also one less day you can afford to relax. You run your hand over the top log, feeling the brittle edges where the cold has begun to split the wood fibres apart. Your fingers stick briefly to the frosty surface. You select 2 small logs, enough to start the morning fire, but not so much that you'll regret it later. Regret is a daily ritual in winter. Regret for burning too much yesterday, for eating too much last week, for failing to patch the hole in the roof before the last storm. Winter in medieval Europe is a season of constant second-guessing. Every decision echoes through the weeks to come. Carrying the logs inside feels like transporting treasure. You clutch them close to your chest, careful not to drop them into the powdery snow that would soak into the wood instantly. Wet logs are useless logs. They hiss and spit angrily when placed on the fire, producing more smoke than warmth. A toxic exchange you can't afford. Inside, your family has begun stirring properly now. Your wife sits upright, rubbing her hands together, her fingers red and raw, her face pale beneath layers of fatigue. The children whimper softly as they awaken to another day of biting cold. No one complains aloud. Complaining doesn't warm you. You kneel before the hearth and carefully place kindling over the few remaining embers you manage to coax back into reluctant life. Thin twigs, dried grass, and strips of bark, gathered and guarded like sacred objects. You breathe gently across the embers, feeding them with oxygen, watching as faint orange sparks blink open like sleepy eyes. It catches. A fragile flame flickers, uncertain at first, then steadies as you feed it carefully. You add the smallest of your logs, listening as the fire accepts the offering with a low, crackling murmur. The warmth is pitiful at first, but precious nonetheless. Everyone shifts a little closer to the hearth instinctively, like moths drawn towards survival. Your wife hands you the dull iron pot, dented, soot-stained, but functional. It will serve again today, as it did yesterday and the day before that. The porridge will be thin this morning. Supplies are dwindling as winter drags on, and spring planting is still months away. The flour sack grows lighter each day, a cruel countdown you cannot ignore. You ladle water into the pot from the clay jug beside the hearth. Water gathered from yesterday's well trip before it had frozen over entirely. Even the water resists cooperation, forming thin skins of ice overnight that you must break through with each use. You add a handful of coarse barley, some dried root vegetables, and a pinch of salt, sparingly, because salt is expensive and scarce. The mixture begins to simmer slowly, releasing steam that briefly fogs the air before being devoured by the cold. The children huddle beneath the family's one good blanket, sharing what little warmth they can steal from one another. Your eldest son clutches his little sister's hand beneath the folds, both of them watching you with wide, hollow eyes that have already learned to associate mornings with hunger and cold. Their cheeks are ruddy from the chill, their noses run constantly, their lips are cracked and bleeding. Your wife whispers a morning prayer under her breath. You join her quietly, not because you expect divine intervention, but because the routine brings comfort. Routine is one of the few things winter cannot take from you. Routine is armour. The fire offers just enough heat to thaw your fingers slightly as you stir the pot. The scent of boiling barley fills the room, faint and uninspiring, but still better than the sharp sting of cold emptiness. Hunger never fully leaves in winter. It hovers like the cold, always close, always watching. You glance at your mother across the room. Her thin frame is wrapped in every scrap of fabric you own, her breath shallow, her eyes half closed. She rarely speaks these days. Winter has aged her rapidly. Each season strips away a little more strength, a little more light. She watches you from her corner, with a distant expression that suggests she's already halfway gone, but she's breathing. That's something. The porridge is ready. You portion it out into wooden bowls, chipped, cracked, stained from years of use. Each person receives their share. No one receives enough. There is no such thing as enough in winter. The portions are carefully equalized, to prevent jealousy, yes, but more importantly, to avoid guilt. You can't afford to favor anyone. Fairness is survival. The meal is eaten in silence, punctuated only by the occasional cough, the scrape of wooden spoons, and the low whimper of the smallest child when the hot porridge burns her tongue slightly. Your wife hushes her gently, rocking her in thin arms that barely have strength left. You chew methodically, forcing the thick, gluey mass down your throat. It sticks to your teeth, which ache from cold exposure and years of malnutrition. When the bowls are empty, they're placed carefully aside. Nothing is ever wasted. The remaining warmth from the hearth is shared for a few minutes longer before you know you must begin the daily struggle that awaits outside. The cold will not wait. It never does. As you rise, you glance out the open door. The wind has shifted slightly. Fine snowflakes drift sideways in thin, lazy sheets, like ash from some invisible fire. Another storm is approaching. Of course it is. Winter in medieval Europe doesn't simply happen. It dominates. It dictates every choice you make, every breath you take, every plan you try to entertain. It reduces your world to a small circle of survival. A few feet of warmth around a dying fire, a single stack of dwindling firewood, a sack of barley that feels lighter each time you touch it. And the worst part is knowing that you have months to go. You step outside, squinting into the dim morning light. The landscape before you feels almost alien, as if the world has been draped in a suffocating sheet of ice and silence. The snow stretches in every direction, unbroken except for the occasional narrow path carved by your neighbours, trudging through their own private battles against the cold. The cold bites instantly at your exposed face. The moisture in your nostrils freezes within seconds, forming sharp little needles that make every breath sting. You keep your mouth slightly open as you breathe, trying to warm the air as best you can, but that only invites the wind to whip your lips dry and cracked again. Your cheeks burn with the sting of wind chill, even beneath the rough wool scarf wrapped tightly around your head. The scarf smells of old smoke and sweat. Everything smells of old smoke and sweat, but at least it keeps the wind from cutting directly into your throat. The village itself is silent, muffled by the heavy snowpack that absorbs sound like a thick, frozen sponge. Even the usual noises of daily life, chickens clucking, dogs barking, children playing, have faded into winter's hush. Only the occasional creak of wood under strain, or the distant wail of wind slipping between the gaps in walls, breaks the oppressive quiet. The snow crunches beneath your boots with every step, but the crunch is brittle, sharp. Not the playful softness of fresh snowfall, but the fractured edge of packed, refrozen slush. Each step feels calculated. The ground is uneven, hidden by drifts and ice patches that threaten to twist your ankle or send you sprawling face first into the cold embrace of the earth. Falling in these conditions isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. One slip, one twisted knee, one broken bone could mark the beginning of the end for you. Winter doesn't forgive weakness. You glance toward your neighbour's hovel as you pass. Thin tendrils of smoke curl up from a crooked chimney, more of a pipe, really, shoved through the roof's thatching. The smoke snakes upward, vanishing into the pale sky, offering proof that someone inside is fighting their own battle against the cold. You see the faint movement of a bundled figure through the gap in the wooden slats. Another body hunched near another small fire, trying to wring life out of whatever fuel remains. Around you, the village hibernates under its burden of snow. The small wooden homes sag beneath accumulated drifts, roofs bending under the weight like old backs burdened by years of labour. Thatched rooftops leak where they've begun to collapse under melting and refreezing layers. Icicles hang from eaves like jagged daggers, some thick as your forearm, glistening ominously in the dull light. The well comes into view, your destination. Its stone ring is coated in a skin of ice, the rope stiff with frozen droplets, the bucket half buried in snow beside it. You set your jaw and prepare for the daily ritual. First, you must break the surface ice. The previous day's layer has thickened overnight, forming a stubborn shield that must be cracked open to reach the liquid beneath. You take the iron pole set nearby, gripping it tightly despite your numbed fingers, and bring it down with rhythmic strikes. The clang of metal on ice rings out sharply, echoing across the village like a cry of protest. The ice shatters reluctantly, shards scattering like broken glass across the surrounding snow. Each swing sends a jarring vibration through your arms and shoulders, but you continue until you've broken a wide enough hole to lower the bucket. You let the rope slip through your chapped hands slowly, feeling the drag of the water's weight pull it taut as the bucket descends. After several tense seconds, you hear the hollow splash that tells you you've reached water, for now. As you haul the bucket back up, the rope stiffens, coated quickly with ice as the wind licks away any stray droplets. The bucket emerges heavy and glistening, its surface already beginning to freeze over as you wrestle it onto the edge of the well. You scoop out enough water into your clay jug to last a little while. The remainder will freeze solid again by afternoon, and you'll repeat this process tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until your arms give out, or the well itself freezes so deep you can no longer reach the liquid at all. Hauling water in winter is not a chore. It's survival. Water means cooking, cleaning what little can be cleaned, and hydrating brittle bodies slowly drying out in the endless dry cold. But every drop you carry is heavier than its weight suggests, because you know how fragile your access to it is. As you turn back toward your home, you feel the cold begin to seep deeper, curling around your spine, settling into your chest like a lead weight. Your hands ache from gripping the freezing clay jug. The edges of your sleeves are stiff with ice where stray drops have splashed. You quicken your pace slightly, mindful of the treacherous footing beneath the snow, eager to return to the fragile warmth inside. But even as you move, you can't help but notice how your breath labours. Each inhale feels sharp, like shards of glass slicing into your lungs. The air is too dry, too cold, too heavy. Your heart thumps heavily under your layers, working harder with every step, pushing blood to fingers and toes, desperate not to turn numb. As you pass one of the smaller hovels near the edge of the village, you see a bundle lying still near the door. For a moment, you wonder if it's a sack of grain, but then you recognise the shape. It's one of your neighbour's goats, frozen stiff, legs jutting awkwardly beneath its bulk. Its eyes are glazed over, rimmed with frost. Another casualty of the night. You glance away quickly. There's nothing to be done. The family inside will mourn, but not loudly. Livestock means life in winter. A dead animal means less milk, less meat, fewer chances to trade or barter. And yet, these small tragedies are so common that they barely register as news anymore. Loss is constant. The living keep moving. Finally, you reach your own door again. You brace your shoulder against the warped frame, pushing it open with a groan of wood that sounds almost like a sigh. The warmth inside, meagre as it is, hits you immediately. Not enough to chase away the cold completely, but enough to remind you what you're fighting for. Your wife takes the water jug from you with thin hands, her touch gentle but urgent. She glances inside, checking its contents as though hoping for a miracle. Perhaps that it might somehow hold more water than it physically can. You both know better, but still you check. The children remain huddled by the hearth, their faces flushed from the contrast of firelight against the cold that seeps through every gap. The flames flicker as you add another stick to the fire. Not a full log, just enough kindling to keep it from dying too quickly. Always rationing, always measuring. You sit on the worn wooden stool beside the fire and pull off your outer layer, the wool stiff with frost. Your skin tingles as blood begins to return to your fingertips, and for a brief moment you allow yourself to relax, to enjoy the faint sting of returning warmth. The briefest of luxuries. Your wife ladles more porridge into the pot, adding a little extra water to thin it out further, stretching the rations just one more meal. She hums softly as she works, an old tune passed down through generations. A song that carries no joy, only rhythm. Rhythm is enough. The baby stirs and cries softly, her voice thin and reedy from weeks of breathing air, too dry and too cold for her fragile lungs. Your wife scoops her up and rocks her gently, whispering reassurances even as her own eyes betray the fatigue gnawing at her from inside. You watch them, your chest tightening, not from emotion alone, but from that familiar, creeping sense of helplessness. Winter doesn't just attack your body, it attacks your hope. It erodes the edges of your resolve, day after day, flake after flake, until all that remains is the quiet calculation of what can still be done and what can no longer be saved. Outside, the wind howls again, louder now, as if reminding you that it hasn't finished with you yet. The fire crackles softly in response, defiant but fragile. The battle continues. The wind whistles through the cracks in the walls. A thin, ghostly song that never quite stops. It's not loud, but it's always there, like an uninvited guest whose only purpose is to remind you that you are not safe. You shift on your stool, leaning closer to the fire, trying to steal just a few more inches of warmth, as if proximity could fool the cold into forgetting you. But the cold doesn't forget anyone. It knows where you live. It knows your name. Your wife sets the jug of water near the fire so it doesn't freeze, though it likely will anyway before the day is over. Even inside, the temperature hovers just above freezing. Only the space directly in front of the hearth is habitable for any extended period. The further you sit from the flames, the quicker your breath becomes visible again, curling into little white ribbons that evaporate in the dark corners of the room. The walls themselves are alive, not with warmth, but with quiet sounds. The groan of warped wood, the occasional rustle of unseen creatures hiding in thatched roofing, the subtle tap of wind-driven ice pellets striking against the uneven planks. Outside, the world remains frozen in place, but your home creaks like an old ship adrift in a sea of snow. Every piece of your clothing is damp to the touch. The wool absorbs the moisture from your breath, from the air, from your own sweat. Sweat that never fully dries, because drying would require heat, and heat is something you simply do not possess in surplus. Even near the fire, your sleeves remain clammy, your leggings heavy with half-frozen dampness that clings to your skin like punishment. You adjust the cloth wrapped around your feet, feeling the coarse texture rub against your cracked heels. The wool is thin, patched multiple times, and beginning to unravel. You haven't felt true warmth in your toes for days. The constant cold has deadened them into a numbness you've learned to accept as normal. The flesh beneath is likely pale, nearly blue, but you don't dare remove the wrappings to check. Sometimes it's better not to know. The baby cries again, louder this time, a sharp, raw sound that cuts through the monotony like a sudden knife. Your wife rocks her gently, whispering comfort, though there's little she can do to soothe a child who shivers despite being bundled in every scrap of cloth you own. Infants suffer most in the winter. Their tiny bodies lose heat quickly, their skin thin and vulnerable. The risk is constant, hanging over you every moment like an invisible sword. Every winter claims children. You've seen it before. The children who survive winter do not emerge unscathed. The cold leaves its mark. Permanent coughs, weak lungs, stunted growth, chronic fevers that return again and again, like a curse that you can never lift. You glance at your eldest, his ribs already visible beneath his tunic, his eyes sunken, his face pale except for the flushed patches where frostbite has flirted too many times. He stares at the fire, not blinking, not speaking, simply existing in this half-conscious state that children adopt when survival becomes their only instinct. Your wife catches your eye for a brief moment. No words pass between you, but you understand one another. You both see the same things, carry the same fears. There is no solution, only the day ahead, only what must be done next. The day's labour cannot be delayed. The cold doesn't care if your body aches or your child is sick. The animals must be tended, the roof must be checked for damage, the firewood must be rationed and gathered if possible, though gathering in winter is itself a risk. The ground is hard as stone, the branches are brittle. The snow hides dangers beneath its surface, weak patches that can collapse into unseen pits, sharp branches that can snap under your weight, hidden rocks that can break ankles. And then there's the hunger. The hunger is always there. It's quieter than the cold, but equally cruel. Your stomach has shrunk in recent weeks, adjusting to smaller meals. You no longer feel hunger in sharp pangs, but in a dull, constant emptiness. You choose slower, not for digestion but for illusion, to trick your mind into believing you've eaten more than you have. The thin porridge barely provides enough energy to keep your muscles working, let alone keep you warm. The body burns fuel quickly in the cold, and you're always underfed. Sometimes you think of the coming spring as salvation, but deep down you know that spring brings its own punishments. The planting season is grueling. The food stores will run out long before new crops grow. Early spring is often the hardest time, a cruel window where winter's hunger remains, but the hope of harvest is still months away. If you can survive to the first green shoots, you might survive the year, but many don't. You shake the thought from your mind. Thinking too far ahead invites despair. Survival is in the moment. You reach for the iron hook near the hearth and adjust the pot over the fire, redistributing the heat evenly. The flames crackle in response, spitting tiny embers that dance briefly before fading into the gloom. Your eldest son sneezes sharply, the sound startling in the quiet room. His breath hitches afterward, followed by a dry cough that rattles in his chest. Your wife pats his back gently, her eyes never leaving his face. You know that cough. It's the kind that can linger for weeks, sometimes longer, sometimes forever. The old are not spared either. Your mother remains huddled in her corner, her frame motionless under layers of patched fabric. You watch the slow rise and fall of her breathing, each breath laboured, each exhale a visible puff in the frigid air. She hasn't spoken all morning. Fatigue has weighed her down as heavily as any illness. You wonder silently whether she has the strength to see another season. Your gaze shifts again toward the door. The storm is gathering strength. The snow falls faster now, blowing sideways in sharp, angry gusts that rattle the walls. You hear the distant creak of trees bending under the weight of accumulating ice. Another branch will snap soon. You can feel it. The animals need checking. Reluctantly, you rise from your stool, the cold air rushing into the space your body has vacated. You pull on your outer layers again, stiff, damp, heavy, and wrap the scarf tighter around your head. The door resists as you push it open, as if even the house itself is reluctant to let you leave. The barn stands a short distance away, barely visible through the swirling snow. It's not much. A few planks nailed together with rough timbers, gaps in the walls stuffed with straw and mud that froze solid weeks ago. It offers only marginally better protection from the elements than standing outside, but it's enough to keep the animals alive, most of the time. You trudge through knee-deep snow, each step a struggle as the drifts pull at your legs. The wind screams in your ears, finding every gap in your clothing, stabbing icy needles into your skin. Your boots slip on hidden patches of ice beneath the surface, forcing you to move slowly, cautiously. One fall out here, alone, could be catastrophic. You reach the barn and push the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The smell hits you immediately. A sour mixture of animal sweat, damp straw, and manure. It's pungent but oddly welcome in its familiarity. At least there is life here. The animals stir at your presence. A few thin goats, one weak cow, a handful of chickens huddled together for warmth. Their breath fogs the air, adding to the dense humidity inside. They too are fighting their own battles against the cold. The goats shuffle closer to you, recognizing the chance of food. You reach for the feed sack, lighter than it should be, and distribute what little remains. Their hollow eyes follow your every movement, desperate for more. You run your hands over the cow's hide, feeling for any sign of frostbite or illness. She shivers beneath your touch, but she's still breathing, still standing, for now. You know others in the village have lost livestock this winter, frozen to death, starved, or fallen ill from infections that spread quickly in cramped cold quarters. The chickens rustle anxiously as you scatter a few handfuls of grain into the hay. Their feathers are fluffed up as much as possible, each bird puffed into a ball of desperation, clinging to wheat chunks. The storm doesn't stop. It rarely does. You sit near the fire, listening as the wind hammers against the wooden walls, a relentless rhythm like some ancient drum. The house groans in protest under each gust. Every part of the structure creaks, cracks, and shifts slightly under winter's weight. The storm doesn't simply blow, it presses, like a giant hand leaning against your walls, testing their strength. Outside, the world is disappearing under layers of snow, each flake adding a thin coat to what's already been buried. The landscape transforms daily, losing all familiar shapes. Paths vanish, fences disappear, doorways are blocked, and roads become suggestions rather than usable routes. The village shrinks under the weight of it all, not just physically but emotionally. The snow makes your world smaller, one drift at a time. This isn't just snow as you might imagine it. Light, fluffy, sparkling under sunshine. No, this is medieval snow. Dense, heavy, packed with moisture, and brutal. When it falls, it comes down like wet lead. When it sits, it hardens into jagged layers that can cut through clothing and skin when you slip. The wind whips it sideways, carving sharp ridges and towering drifts that loom like frozen waves ready to collapse. The snow isn't your only enemy. The cold itself operates on a separate, more insidious level. It seeps into everything. Your home, your bones, your thoughts. The cold isn't content to make you uncomfortable. It aims for something deeper. Numbness becomes your constant state. First physical, then emotional. Fingers lose sensation quickly. Toes follow soon after. The sharp sting of early frostbite becomes a dull ache. The real danger is when you stop feeling it altogether. Your small hovel, built by your own hands, or perhaps by your fathers before you, was never designed to win against winter. The walls are made of rough-hewn timbers, the gaps filled with wattle and daub, a crude mixture of clay, straw, and mud. It helps in summer. In winter, it's barely a suggestion of insulation. The wind finds every weakness. You've patched cracks year after year, yet still you feel the invisible fingers of cold creeping through at night, brushing against your skin like breath from some unseen predator. The roof is thatched, layers of straw packed thickly atop one another, designed to repel rain. But it does little against snow. When the storms are particularly bad, you lay awake at night, staring at the sagging ceiling, listening to the ominous creaks as snow piles heavier and heavier above you. One day it may collapse. You've seen it happen to neighbours. A roof falls in under the weight, crushing what little exists beneath it, often taking lives with it. Icicles form thick and sharp along the eaves, long as your arm, some thick as your wrist. They hang there like frozen teeth, gleaming in the dim light, threatening to break loose and fall without warning. You've seen one skewer a goat once, years ago. One moment, an animal standing in the yard. The next, pierced clean through by falling ice, dead instantly. The image still haunts you, not for its horror, but for its cold randomness. Nature kills without malice, without reason. It just does. Your windows aren't really windows at all. They're simply holes in the wall, covered loosely with thin animal hide or oiled cloth, barely translucent, letting in a pale grey light during the day. The wind rattles the coverings constantly. When the storms rage hard enough, fine snow sifts through the edges and sprinkles across the floor, a reminder that your barriers against the outside world are paper thin. The floor beneath your feet isn't much of a floor either. It's packed dirt, layered with straw that you scatter regularly to soak up moisture and filth. In winter, the dirt freezes solid in places, creating cold patches that seep through even the thickest of your worn shoes. The straw rots slowly as moisture collects, turning the ground into a pungent mixture of mud, mould, and something worse you've stopped trying to identify. Water is its own daily struggle. You fetch it from the communal well, but once inside, keeping it liquid is a constant chore. Any water not placed directly beside the hearth freezes solid within hours. Your wife learned long ago to warm water for the children before bed. knowing that otherwise, even their drinking water will be blocks of ice by morning. The buckets themselves grow brittle, their wooden hoops shrinking and cracking in the cold, threatening to split apart and spill your precious supply at the worst possible moments. The air inside the hovel is thick, not with warmth, but with smoke. Your chimney is crude, little more than a hole cut into the roof, so the smoke curls and clings inside before finally drifting upward. The children cough constantly. Your own chest feels tight every morning. The soot stains the walls, the ceiling, your clothes and your lungs. Even the fire is not a comfort. It is a negotiation. Every log you burn brings heat, yes, but also shrinks your already dwindling woodpile. You sit close to the flames, letting the heat lick at your skin while your back remains cold and stiff. Move too far from the hearth, and the cold swallows you again. Beyond your small home, the world offers no refuge either. The fields you tend in warmer months are now invisible under several feet of snow. You glance toward where your small vegetable patch once stood, now nothing more than a mound of smooth white curves. The ground beneath is frozen solid, the soil locked like iron, unworkable and dead until a thaw, months away. No seeds planted, no food grown, only memory and hope remain. And the forest nearby once offered some salvation, firewood, small game, berries in season. But now it looms like a frozen fortress. The trees are bare, their branches encased in frost, their trunks silent and unmoving as sentinels. The paths into the woods are treacherous. The snow hides fallen limbs, deep pockets of loose drifts that can swallow a man whole, streams frozen deceptively thin that might collapse beneath your weight. And there are other dangers. Wolves roam in winter. Desperate, starving, bold. You've seen them once already this season, their eyes gleaming in the twilight, their ribs showing through patchy fur. They circle the edges of the village at night, howling into the blackness, daring someone to step too far from the safety of the firelight. One night last year, a neighbour's child was taken, vanished into the woods, never found. The village itself is shrinking as winter tightens its grip. Neighbours stay indoors, only venturing out when absolutely necessary. You see them occasionally, huddled shapes moving quickly between homes, faces hidden under layers of cloth and fur, voices hushed by the wind. Conversation slows, laughter disappears entirely. Winter breeds isolation, and with isolation comes a different kind of cold, the cold of loneliness. Even sound travels differently in the winter air. The snow muffles everything, deadening footsteps, absorbing voices. You can stand a few feet from someone and feel as though they're already fading away. The world becomes a quiet, frozen tomb. The church bell, when it rings, sounds distant, hollow, like a ghost of itself, barely able to cut through the thick air. Nightfall arrives early, stealing what little daylight exists. By mid-afternoon, the sun hangs low, casting long shadows that stretch unnaturally across the snow. Darkness moves in swiftly after, bringing with it even colder temperatures that make the air feel like shattered glass. You light your single oil lamp, its flame flickering weakly against the oppressive dark, and gather close to the hearth with your family, clinging to what little warmth and light you can muster. And through it all, the snow continues to fall. The flakes seem endless. They drift down silently, endlessly, one after another, each one insignificant alone, but together building an empire of cold that buries everything beneath its rule. You watch them from your small window flap, sometimes for hours, hypnotized by the steady, merciless rhythm of their descent. No wind is required. No storm is needed. The snow simply falls. And falls. And falls. This is winter. Not a season, but a force. A constant companion that presses on your body, your home, your mind. It shapes how you live, how you move, how you think. It steals warmth, hope, and life with the same steady hand. You do not fight winter. You endure it. And even endurance has its limits. The storm that began in the morning drags on into the late afternoon, as if the sky itself has nothing better to do than layer another foot of snow onto the brittle world beneath it. You sit inside your hovel and listen to it, the sound a constant backdrop to your existence. The blizzard doesn't howl the way it did earlier. Now it hums, a low, endless murmur that presses on your ears, like distant whispers you can't quite understand. The light fades quickly. In winter, there's no long, lingering sunset. The day simply collapses into night like a breath being held too long. One moment, you're squinting into a dim grey outside. The next, you're swallowed whole by blackness. The small flame in your oil lamp flickers and dances, but its reach is pitiful. The shadows loom heavy against the walls, as if the night itself were leaning closer to inspect you. You know how long this will last. You know it too well. Winter is not one night. It's a sentence. Weeks upon weeks of repetition, each day identical to the last, with only the smallest variations in suffering. You stopped counting the days sometime after the first real snowfall. What would be the point? The seasons themselves are unreliable. Winter doesn't leave when the calendar tells it to. It leaves when it's finished breaking everything. The air inside the hovel feels thicker at night. Not warmer, never truly warm, but heavier, as though the moisture and smoke have grown tired of floating and now settle against your skin. You feel it in your lungs when you breathe, that dense, smoky air laced with the scent of burned wood, wet wool, and unwashed bodies. Every member of your family stays close to the hearth now, huddled so tightly together that you can feel each other's breath, hear every shallow exhale. Your youngest child curls against your wife's side, her small face half hidden beneath scraps of cloth stitched together from old tunics long worn to rags. The child stirs occasionally, making small sounds in her sleep. Not full cries, just tiny gasps, like someone talking to a dream they can't quite escape. Your wife is silent, as she often is at this hour. Her eyes are half-lidded, heavy with exhaustion. Her hands busy with mending what little clothing you have left. Her fingers work automatically, even though the light is barely enough for her to see the stitches. She knows these garments by feel now, every tear memorized, every frayed seam mapped in her fingertips. The thread she uses is rough and inconsistent, salvaged from older garments that couldn't survive one more repair. The children don't play in winter. There's no energy for it. No open ground to run across. No toys to distract them. They simply sit, sleep, or help with small tasks. Even laughter feels like a foreign thing now. A distant memory from autumn, when the harvest had not yet run thin, when the world had not yet frozen solid around you. The roof above you creaks again as another load of snow settles on top. You glance upward instinctively, watching the way the thatch dips slightly under the shifting weight. It holds, for now, but the worry never leaves. You've seen what happens when a roof gives way. You've seen neighbours dig frantically through collapsed thatch and timber, their hands raw and bleeding, searching for a child or elder who didn't make it out. Outside the village, the forest looms. You can't see it now, but you feel its presence. The trees stand like frozen monuments, their skeletal branches coated in a thick layer of ice that cracks and groans under its own weight. Every so often, you hear the sharp, clean snap of a branch giving way, crashing to the ground somewhere in the darkness. The sound echoes in the quiet night like distant gunfire. The forest hides other dangers as well. Wolves are always a concern, but there are worse things than wolves in a medieval winter. Hunger, disease, cold, and the creeping sense that the world itself has grown tired of you. That this entire season is nature's long, drawn-out sigh of disinterest in your survival. You glance towards the wooden door, its edges lined with frost, the iron latch stiff and brittle. Snow has piled against it from the outside, sealing it tighter. You'll have to shovel your way out in the morning again, and each time you clear a path, the storm erases your work like a child wiping a slate clean. The futility of it gnaws at you. Even the smallest victories, clearing a path, chopping enough wood for one more night, fetching water from the well, are temporary. The winter reclaims everything. The fire sputters slightly as a pocket of damp wood hisses and spits sparks into the air. You shift forward instinctively, shielding your youngest child with your arm, as one ember arcs toward you before dying in mid-air. The flames grow unsteady, lower, more fragile. You hesitate before adding another log. The stack of firewood near the door is shrinking, and you feel every missing piece like a weight pressing on your ribs. Each log represents a calculation. Burn it now and be warmer tonight. Save it and hope for warmth tomorrow. There is no abundance, only the constant balancing act of not too much, not too little. You learned long ago that greed with firewood is punished swiftly by the weeks still ahead. The livestock outside will be struggling tonight as well. The goats, huddled together in their crude shelter, breathe shallowly to conserve body heat. Their feed is nearly gone. The cow's breath freezes against the inside walls of the barn, creating crystalline patches of frost along the wooden beams. The chickens will have gone still, bodies tucked into themselves like small, shivering knots. If the storm continues for days, you know some of them may not survive. When animals die in winter, the grief is immediate, but the consequences are far worse. Every creature lost is one less source of milk, eggs or meat come spring. In this world, you don't just grieve the death itself. You grieve the ripple it sends through the future. Fewer animals means less trade, fewer goods to barter for salt, cloth or precious flour. The winter doesn't merely starve you in the present, it strangles your future before it can even arrive. The church bell tolls faintly in the distance, marking the final evening prayers. You hear it as a dull, hollow sound, as though the cold has swallowed its voice and returned only a ghost of the chime. You murmur your own prayer under your breath, more out of habit than hope. Even faith feels thinner in winter, like a candle that flickers uncertainly as the wind tugs at its edges. You glance at your wife again. She catches your gaze briefly, offers a small, tight smile, more a muscle reflex than true reassurance, and returns to her sewing. Neither of you says the things you're both thinking, that the food is running low, that the roof may not survive another heavy snowfall, that if illness strikes, you have no remedy beyond prayer and stubbornness. The night deepens. The storm outside intensifies, the wind howling now in uneven bursts, rattling the wooden walls like a giant's fist pounding against a weak door. You know the sound of wind too well. It's not random. You can almost sense its mood, its anger, its cold amusement. You've felt it pressing against your home like a living thing, testing for weaknesses, waiting for cracks to exploit. In the corner, your mother stirs beneath her pile of blankets, coughing weakly. Her breath rattles in her throat for several long seconds before she settles again. The coughs have grown worse this week. You try not to think about what it might mean. Death in winter comes quietly at first. A cough that deepens, a fever that won't break, a shiver that won't stop. By the time it arrives fully, there's little left to fight with. No doctor, no medicine, only old remedies, prayers, and the cruel roll of fate. You wrap another layer of wool around your shoulders and shift closer to the hearth, the heat barely penetrating the layers of cold that have settled into your bones. You stretch out your hands, fingers stiff and swollen, skin split open in tiny red cracks that bleed when you move. Even sitting this close to the fire, your back feels cold. This is the reality of winter's existence. A constant negotiation between heat and cold, hunger and rationing, exhaustion and duty. Every hour of every day is spent calculating how much you can give and how much you can afford to lose. There are no breaks, no reprieve, only brief, fragile moments where the cold pauses to catch its breath before returning twice as hard. The storm rages on into the night, and you listen to it, knowing it will still be there in the morning. It always is. Winter doesn't come and go, it simply stays. You sleep lightly, if it can even be called sleep. The cold doesn't allow the kind of rest that brings true peace. It allows fragments, broken hours stitched together by the constant need to shift positions, to pull the blanket tighter, to check on the children huddled nearby. You wake often, not fully conscious but aware enough to hear the wind outside, to feel the sharp sting of cold air brushing your face when the fire dims too low. Even in sleep, you are negotiating with the winter, bargaining for warmth one breath at a time. When morning arrives, it doesn't announce itself with sunlight. The light outside is a sickly grey, muted by the heavy blanket of storm clouds still pressing low against the land. Snow continues to fall, though now in smaller, thinner flakes that drift lazily to the ground. The storm has lost its anger, but not its intent. It's no longer punishing you loudly. It's simply burying you quietly. The air inside feels colder than the night before. The fire burned low while you slept, and though some embers still glow faintly beneath a crust of ash, the room has surrendered again to winter's reach. Your breath fogs immediately as you sit up, your muscles stiff, your joints locking momentarily before yielding to movement. Your wife stirs beside you, eyes heavy with fatigue. Neither of you speaks yet. The morning words can wait. First, the fire. You rise and approach the hearth. The embers are stubborn but alive, and you coax them gently with fresh kindling, blowing softly until the faint orange flickers grow into shaky little flames. You feed the fire carefully, not too much, not too quickly. The precious fuel must last. Always. As the fire grows, the others begin to move. The children sit up, faces flushed from sleeping too close to each other under a single blanket. Their small hands instinctively reach out toward the growing heat. Your mother shifts but does not rise. Her cough has grown worse overnight. A dry, rattling sound that scrapes at your ears with every breath. The familiar smell of burning wood fills the hovel once more, mixing with the heavy odour of unwashed bodies and damp wool. The air is thick but necessary. You don't question it anymore. This is simply how air smells in winter. Today brings more work, as always. The first task is to clear the snow. Overnight, another heavy drift has formed against the door, pinning it shut. You brace your shoulder and push, feeling the door give slowly under your weight as brittle snow breaks away from its edges. Once the opening is wide enough, the full force of winter rushes inside. Sharp, dry, stinging your exposed skin instantly. The path you dug yesterday has vanished beneath fresh layers of snow. Your footprints are gone, as though you were never there. Only the memory of yesterday's labour remains, and even that is fading. You step outside, your boots sinking deep into the fresh powder. Each movement requires deliberate effort, your legs lifting high to avoid being swallowed by the uneven drifts. The snow clings to you, weighing down your clothes, freezing against the rough wool and leather. Your breath escapes in great clouds as you exhale heavily, each one dissolving quickly into the frigid air. Around you, the village appears half buried. The smaller hovels look like squat mounds of snow, their roofs sagging dangerously under the growing weight. Chimney smoke curls lazily from a few homes, barely visible against the pale sky. You see no one else outside yet. The storm has kept everyone trapped inside, delaying the daily rituals. You begin shoveling with the crude wooden spade you crafted years ago. The blade is dull, the handle splintered, but it functions well enough to move snow. You clear a narrow path from the door to the barn first, creating a small channel through the drifts, so you can tend to the animals. The labour burns your muscles quickly. Your shoulders ache, your back protests, your breath becomes laboured. The cold air bites at your throat with each gasp, turning your lungs raw. But you continue, one shovelful at a time, knowing that every minute spent clearing now saves effort later when the drifts grow even higher. The snow is heavy today, wet. Each scoop feels like lifting sodden sacks of flour, the weight growing as ice forms quickly on the blade. You pause often to knock frozen clumps off the spade, your gloved hands numbing further with each pause. Your fingers, wrapped in layers of linen and leather, lose sensation first, a dull tingling that warns you to move faster or risk frostbite. Finally, after what feels like hours but is likely only one, you reach the barn. The structure moans as you force open its frozen door. Inside, the animals shiver in their cramped pens. The goats bleat softly, their breath visible in the freezing air. The cow stands motionless, ribs visible beneath a thin winter coat. The chickens rustle faintly, tucked tightly against one another in the far corner. You move quickly, checking each animal, ensuring none have collapsed during the night. The cold spares nothing for free. You spread what little hay remains, breaking apart frozen clumps that stick together like bricks. The feed is dwindling. You've stretched it further than you thought possible, but the pile is dangerously small now. Water is another challenge. The buckets freeze solid overnight, turning into blocks of ice that must be thawed by the fire each morning. You chip at the surface with a dull blade, cracking open the frozen crust to reach liquid beneath. The animals drink greedily when you finally place the buckets before them. You linger a moment longer than necessary inside the barn. Though unheated, the small space traps some of the animals' body heat, creating a fragile pocket of air that feels almost tolerable compared to the brutal open wind. The smell of animals, pungent, sour, heavy, wraps around you like a familiar, unpleasant comfort. Outside, the wind rises again, as if sensing your momentary reprieve and calling you back into its embrace. You return to the house, your path already beginning to drift close behind you. The snow moves with unsettling speed, filling in your footprints almost as fast as you make them. Nature erases your existence as quickly as you create it. Inside, your wife has prepared a thin breakfast, barley porridge again, stretched thinner than ever. A single shriveled apple, wrinkled from storage, is sliced and divided among the children. The fruit was harvested months ago, carefully hoarded for moments like this, rare treats to ward off scurvy, to offer brief flickers of normalcy. The children eat in silence, eyes fixed on their bowls, their movements slow from hunger. The baby clutches her mother's arm, too young to understand the calculations that dictate how much food she receives. Your own portion is smaller still. The children come first. They always come first. You swallow each bite slowly, savouring the weak warmth of the porridge even as it sticks to your teeth and offers little real comfort. The thin slices of apple taste almost sweet in comparison, a memory of autumn captured in one fleeting mouthful. Your wife glances at you as you eat, her face unreadable, but her eyes heavy with unspoken worries. You nod slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the truth you both know. The stores will not last much longer. The days ahead will only grow colder. You finish your meagre meal and rise again. The fire needs tending. The animals will require another check before nightfall. The roof must be inspected for sagging under the weight of snow. There is no rest, not in winter. Outside, the storm regathers strength. The wind returns with renewed anger, flinging loose snow across the village like waves crashing against a shore. The world beyond your walls has no mercy. It offers no comfort. Only the cold, endless and patient, waiting to see which of you will outlast the other. This is not a season. This is existence. The afternoon passes, but not because time moves quickly. Time in winter moves like frozen syrup. Slow, heavy, reluctant. You don't live by the hour here. You live by tasks. Each task is an anchor against the weight of the endless white pressing down from above. You move from one small duty to the next, not because you expect relief, but because standing still invites despair. Work is survival. Motion is defense. You check the woodpile again. The sight makes your stomach tighten. The stack has grown pitifully small. What was once a neat pile of labour, chopped and prepared in the fading days of autumn, is now a scattered skeleton of what you need. You run your gloved hand over the remaining logs, feeling the rough grain beneath your fingertips. You count without counting. You know the number instinctively now, because you revisit it in your head every night before sleep. You know exactly how many fires are left before you run out. Gathering more wood isn't simple. The forest offers fuel, yes, but at great risk. You glance toward the distant tree line, or rather, where it should be, now hidden behind swirls of snow. Every step into the wood is a gamble. The drifts are deep. The terrain is uneven and treacherous beneath the white, hiding holes, ice-covered streams, fallen branches sharp as spears. And then there are the wolves. You hear them more often now. Distant howls that drift on the wind at dusk. Desperate voices searching for prey. The animals grow bolder as hunger gnaws at them through the months. You've seen their tracks in the snow. Long, deliberate prints that weave around the village outskirts. Close enough to sense your presence, but far enough to avoid torches and human shouts. The village itself feels smaller every day. The world shrinks inward during winter. Neighbours are rarely seen except when absolutely necessary, gathering water, tending animals, or exchanging brief, tense words when trading tiny amounts of grain or cloth. No one lingers outside. Conversations are short. Smiles are thin. Everyone carries the same tight, silent weight. You remember autumn differently. The harvest season brought life to the village. Voices, laughter, neighbours helping each other carry full baskets. Children ran through fields. Music drifted from the tavern. Even the air smelled of life then. Fresh hay, ripened fruit, newly baked bread. But winter strips it all away. Now the smells are of smoke and damp wool, of sweat that cannot be washed away because water freezes too quickly to make bathing possible, of bodies trapped in heavy clothes that haven't been fully dry in weeks, of old stew cooked and recooked for days, of the ever-present sour odour of damp straw on the dirt floor. Bathing, once an occasional ritual in warmer months, becomes nearly impossible in winter. Water freezes before you can even warm enough of it. Heating a full basin requires so much firewood that you'd burn a day's ration just to wash yourself. So you don't. No one does. Your skin itches constantly under layers of sweat-soaked wool, crawling with these visible itches of lice that thrive even when the temperature drops. The children scratch absent-mindedly, pulling at their sleeves where the itching is worst. Your wife discreetly picks through your daughter's hair with a crude bone comb near the hearth, hunting for the small, persistent invaders. It's a losing battle, but a ritual that helps maintain some sense of control. You hear another crack outside. Not a branch this time, but the sharp snap of ice shifting on the roof. Your heart jumps instinctively. The roof holds, for now. But you know its limits. You've seen roofs collapse mid-season before. The weight of accumulated snow turns every hovel into a coffin waiting for one last storm to tip the scales. As the light fades, you make another check of the animals before full dark arrives. The snowdrifts near the barn have grown higher since morning. The wind sculpts them into strange, sharp-edged hills, like frozen dunes that shift shape daily. The goats shiver and bleat softly as you step inside. The cow exhales long, heavy breaths, her eyes dull from exhaustion. You check her hooves, running your hand down her stiff legs to ensure no frostbite has set in. Her breath freezes into frost against her whiskers, creating small icicles that dangle from her muzzle. You speak to them quietly, almost apologetically. The animals don't understand your words, but the rhythm of your voice seems to calm them for a moment. These creatures are not just livestock. They are your insurance against spring starvation. They are survival given form. Returning inside, you stamp snow from your boots, knock frost from your sleeves, and close the door quickly against the wind that still seeks to claw its way inside. The fire burns low. The wood ration for the night has already been measured. You add a small log and watch as the flames revive briefly, licking upward before settling into a steady, quiet glow. Supper is thin again. The same barley stew, thinned more than before. No meat, no bread, just a few root vegetables from the dwindling cellar supply, sliced thin to give the illusion of plenty. The children eat silently, their eyes half closed from exhaustion more than fullness. After eating, your wife pulls out a small basket containing scraps of cloth and begins mending again. The same sleeves, the same tears, the same endless cycle of sewing and re-sewing garments that have outlived their natural lifespans. You watch her fingers work, stiff and red from the cold. The skin on her knuckles is cracked deeply, tiny spots of dried blood marking where the thread has cut into her. She doesn't flinch. The pain has become background noise now. In the far corner, your mother stirs weakly, her breath shallow. The cough that started quietly weeks ago now racks her chest in violent fits. She holds a damp cloth to her mouth, stained faintly pink. You know what this means. You've seen it before. There's no doctor to call. No medicine. No herbs this time of year. Only prayers. Not for recovery, but for an easy passing. Death is not a visitor in winter. It is a neighbour who knocks quietly and waits patiently for his turn. The storm outside eases into a gentle snow again. The wind softens, leaving behind only the hiss of flakes falling, the sound nearly imperceptible but ever present. You stare at the window covering, where faint moonlight filters through thin cloth, casting weak patterns across the packed dirt floor. The quiet is oppressive. The long nights of winter aren't simply dark. They are hollow. Hours pass with no sound beyond the occasional crack of wood or your mother's shallow breathing. You sit near the fire, eyes half closed, head heavy, unwilling to fully sleep, but unable to remain fully awake. And outside, the snow keeps falling. You wonder, not for the first time, how many more nights like this you'll face before the first thaw arrives, before the sun lingers longer in the sky, before the roads reappear beneath the snow, before the livestock venture outside again without fear of freezing where they stand, before the hunger turns less sharp, before you can breathe without seeing your own breath, before you can hear bird song again. But spring is still distant, weeks, perhaps months, depending on winter's whim. And until then you endure. You measure the woodpile. You count the sacks of grain. You monitor the coffin. The first duty of the day is not waking up. It's convincing your frozen body to move at all. Winter has no respect for your exhaustion. There are no lazy mornings, no extra minutes spent beneath the covers, no indulgent stretches as you ease into the day. The moment you open your eyes, you're immediately aware of how deeply the cold has settled into your joints overnight, stiffening them like frozen branches. Each movement is a negotiation with pain. You force yourself upright. Your back protests. Your knees creak like the hinges of a rotted barn door. Your fingers clench and unclench slowly, the skin splitting open again along the familiar red cracks. The blood freezes almost as soon as it appears. You wipe it away mechanically. The fire is almost dead again, smothered under its own ash. You kneel before it, carefully brushing away the grey crust, searching for any trace of glowing embers beneath. You find a faint pulse of heat and breathe onto it gently, feeding it with the smallest pieces of kindling. Sparks leap up weakly, as if startled by your breath, before catching hold. Slowly the tiny flame begins to strengthen. You add a carefully rationed piece of wood, small enough to preserve your dwindling stockpile, but large enough to warm the room for a few brief moments. Your wife stirs behind you, pulling the children closer, wrapping their tiny bodies in what thin blankets remain. Their breath curls into the air like smoke. There's no true meal waiting for you. Just another round of thin porridge, reheated from yesterday's leftovers. The barley gruel sticks to the pot like paste, requiring several minutes of scraping and stirring to bring it back to a form that can be swallowed. You share what little there is, dividing it evenly between your family. The children eat slowly, chewing each bland mouthful longer than necessary, trying to make it last. Your own bowl is emptier than theirs. That too has become routine. The food warms your stomach, but it does nothing to ease the fatigue that wraps around you like another layer of wet wool. You know what comes next. The cold does not permit idleness. The day's labour waits. First, the barn. You dress in the same heavy layers. Stiff woolen tunic, patched cloak, fraying gloves, the same threadbare scarf that's protected you for years. The leather of your boots is cracked, patched multiple times with rough stitching, barely holding together against the moisture that seeps in with every step through the snow. The barn door groans as you force it open again. The snow has piled higher against it overnight, requiring you to shove with both hands just to create enough space to slip inside. The animals stir at your entrance, their breaths rising visibly into the cold, still air. You move quickly, checking each creature as you've done every morning of this long winter. The cow's ribs are more pronounced than before. Her breath comes in heavy puffs, her eyes tired. The goats shuffle closer together, their thin bodies pressed against one another for warmth. The chickens are silent, barely shifting beneath their straw bedding. The feed is running out. What little grain remains has been stretched thin for weeks. You've mixed in straw, dried leaves, and ground bark to bulk it up. Anything to give the animal something to chew, even if it offers little nourishment. Hunger makes them desperate. You've caught the goats gnawing at the wooden beams of the barn more than once. Water is another battle. The buckets froze solid again overnight. You chip at the ice with a blunt iron blade, cracking open the surface enough to pull out slushy chunks. You melt them carefully by the fire, adding what little liquid remains into the troughs. The animals drink greedily, eyes wide and frantic, tongues scraping at the ice as for every drop. Each task is harder than the one before. Each motion demands more energy than you have to give. The cold steals your strength by inches, leeching it away with every breath, every frozen bucket, every handful of dry straw scattered across the barn floor. You pause for a moment, leaning against one of the wooden beams, catching your breath. The frost-covered wood burns against your bare hand, even through the thin leather glove. You pull it back quickly, the skin of your fingertips already turning white at the edges. There's no time to rest. The snow must be cleared again. Outside, the path you dug yesterday is gone, reclaimed by drifting snow, as though your efforts had never existed. The wind has sculpted fresh drifts along the narrow route between your home and the well. The snowbanks rise like white waves, high and uneven, their surfaces crusted over with sharp, frozen layers that crunch and splinter beneath your boots. You grab the wooden spade and begin the monotonous labour again, shoveling, clearing, lifting, dumping. Each movement sends a fresh stab of pain through your back and shoulders. The snow feels heavier today, wetter from the brief thaw the day before, now refrozen into dense slabs. You strike at the crust repeatedly, breaking it apart with brute force before scooping it away. The wind cuts at your exposed face, turning your cheeks raw and red. Your breath fogs in thick clouds, briefly blinding you as you exhale into your own vision. You wipe at your eyes with your sleeve, the wool scraping painfully across your skin. Each step forward feels like a small battle won, but the victories are always temporary. By midday, you finally reach the well. The familiar stone ring is buried beneath nearly a full arm's length of snow. only the very top peeking out above the drifts. You clear it carefully, scraping away the ice that has formed along the edges. The bucket's rope is stiff with frost, frozen solid where moisture from previous hauls has clung to it overnight. You tug at it slowly, working the ice loose inch by inch until it finally yields. Lowering the bucket requires caution. The weight of the ice threatens to snap the brittle rope at any moment. The splash echoes faintly from the depths as the bucket hits the water below. You pull it back up slowly, the rope groaning with each foot of ascent. The cold bites at your hands through the thin gloves, the damp rope freezing your fingers as you guide the bucket upward. The water inside is frigid and already beginning to freeze around the edges. You pour it carefully into your clay jug, watching a small ice crystals form on the surface almost instantly. You know you must return quickly, or risk the water freezing solid before you even reach the door. The wind has shifted again during your work. Gusts swirl loose snow into your path as you trudge back toward your home, the jug clutched tightly against your chest. The drifts close in around your boots, forcing you to lift your legs higher with each heavy step. By the time you reach the door, your legs burn with exertion. Your breath comes in gasps. The jug's outer layer is already coated in a thin skin of ice. Inside, the fire still burns, smaller now, flickering low. You place the jug beside it immediately, letting the heat protect the precious liquid from freezing fully. Your wife takes it wordlessly, beginning preparations for the evening meal, such as it is. The labour continues. There is wood to split, what little remains. The logs grow smaller each day, each split requiring careful judgment. If you make them too thin, they burn too quickly. Too thick, and they're harder to ignite. You kneel beside the chopping block near the barn, your breath puffing in steady clouds as you swing the iron wedge down again and again. The dull thunk of the blade into frozen wood echoes into the still afternoon air. The axe blade sticks often, forcing you to wrestle it loose with numbed fingers. The wood itself resists. Frozen through it cracks unpredictably along uneven grains, sometimes splitting cleanly, sometimes shattering into useless splinters. Every wasted piece feels like a small death, fuel lost forever. Your shoulders throb. Your fingers burn from cold. Your back feels like tightly wound rope threatening to snap. You do not stop, because you cannot. The labour is the only thing standing between your family and the cold that waits patiently for you to falter. The weight of winter is not only measured in snow and ice, but in repetition. Every task is familiar. Because you've done it before, you'll do it again tomorrow. And the day after that. Labour is your calendar here. The sameness of it becomes both your torment and your tether. Without these rituals of struggle, you would drift entirely into hopelessness. By mid-afternoon, you turn your attention to what little remains of your stored provisions. The root cellar, if you can call it that, lies under a mound of snow behind the house, its entrance nearly swallowed by the last storm. You shovel your way to it carefully, watching each step for hidden traps beneath the drifts. The snow conceals its own dangers. Sharp rocks, broken branches, animal burrows that can suddenly give way beneath your weight. The wooden hatch is frozen shut. You work at it patiently, chipping away at the ice that has sealed the edges. The blade of your small iron knife scrapes against the frozen wood, sending thin slivers of ice skittering across the packed snow beneath your knees. Finally, with a loud creak, the hatch lifts. The air that escapes is even colder than the surface, sharp and musty with the smell of stored earth and decaying vegetables. You lower yourself slowly into the hole, careful not to lose your footing on the slick wooden ladder. If you fall here, no one will hear you until the evening, and even then, whether they could pull you out is another question entirely. The cellar is small, just deep enough to keep your meagre stores from freezing entirely, but cold enough to preserve them through the long months. You scan what remains with quick, expert eyes. A few shriveled turnips lie bundled in old cloth. A sack of barley sits half empty in the corner. Some dried beans, carefully tied in rough linen bags. 3 small jars of pickled cabbage, the brine cloudy with age. 2 handfuls of dried apples, browning but still edible. And that is nearly all. You feel the weight settle in your chest again, heavier than the physical cold pressing against your ribs. You know how much is left without counting. You've memorized these shells for weeks, watching them shrink with each meal. You reach for one of the turnips, inspecting it for rot. The skin is soft and wrinkled, but still intact. It will do, for today. You gather a few more vegetables, a handful of beans, and one of the precious jars of pickled cabbage, enough for another thin stew to carry your family through another day. You climb out slowly, securing the hatch behind you. Your breath comes heavier now, not from the work itself, but from the knowledge of what these stores represent. There's no market nearby, no merchant caravan bringing exotic goods, no neighbour with a secret reserves to share. What you have is all there is. You carry the food inside carefully. Your wife takes it without a word, already planning how to divide it. She's grown skilled in this grim arithmetic, how to make too little stretch into not quite enough. The children sit near the fire, their eyes heavy with fatigue, but too hungry to fall asleep yet. Their cheeks are flushed red from exposure, their lips cracked and dry. They don't cry as often now. Hunger has taught them patience. Crying wastes energy. Your mother coughs again from her cot in the corner, the sound weaker now, but more frequent. The fire's heat barely reaches her where she lies, despite the layers of cloth piled over her thin frame. She mutters softly in her sleep, her words slurred and jumbled, half prayers, half dreams. You listen for any change in her breathing, ears sharpened by weeks of worry. Once inside, you tend to your tools. The spade is growing brittle from the endless freeze-thaw cycle. The wooden handle is cracked. You bind it tightly with thin strips of leather, hoping it will hold for at least a few more days. The blade of your axe is dull again, blunted by the frozen knots of the firewood. You sharpen it by firelight, dragging the iron edge across a flat stone with slow, careful strokes. The scrape of metal against stone is oddly soothing, a small piece of control in a world where most things slip through your grasp. The edge won't hold long. Nothing holds long in winter. As evening descends, you step outside one more time. The wind has calmed slightly, but the sky offers no comfort. Thick clouds hang low, heavy with the promise of more snow. The air carries that peculiar silence that only comes before another storm. You scan the horizon, though there's little to see. The outlines of the distant trees blur into soft, grey mounds. The village lies still, each home swallowed by snow, smoke curling upward from a few scattered chimneys. You glimpse a neighbour briefly, a hunched figure hauling firewood toward his door, moving slowly, deliberately, as if every step risks collapse. You exchange no words. There's nothing left to say. Every family fights its own quiet battle against the same relentless enemy. Returning inside, you close the door quickly behind you. The wind slips in for just a moment, carrying with it a burst of bitter cold that sends a fresh shiver down your spine. You seal the latch and return to the fire. Supper is prepared, a thin stew of turnip, barley and beans, seasoned only with salt. The pickled cabbage offers a sharp, sour tang that breaks the monotony of the meal. A rare gift of flavour in a world gone flat with sameness. You portion the bowls carefully, handing them to your family. The children eat slowly, savouring each spoonful. Your wife eats last, her eyes always on the others, ensuring they have enough before she takes her share. You do the same. The stew warms your stomach, but leaves the hunger beneath it untouched. The rest of the evening passes in silence. The fire burns lower. The wood pile shrinks. The cold presses harder against the thin walls. And tomorrow it will begin again. The wind finds its way into the cracks again that night. No matter how tightly you seal the door, no matter how many scraps of cloth you stuff into the gaps between the planks, the wind always finds the openings. You feel it curling around your face as you lay near the fire, a thin stream of air that seems colder than the storm outside. It's not the volume of cold that gets you in winter, it's the persistence, the way it never relents, never forgets about you. The cold is patient, your sleep comes and goes. The fire sputters low. The embers glow faintly under a blanket of ash. You stir periodically, adding another handful of kindling when the flame threatens to die entirely. The constant balancing act never stops. You have to keep just enough flame alive to hold the cold at bay, but never so much that you burn through the precious few logs remaining. In the darkness, the sound of your mother's coughing continues, thin and hollow now. She struggles for breath, as though the air itself resists entering her lungs. You've heard this kind of breathing before, the wheezing rasp that comes at the end of a long, losing battle. A cold infects everything, the lungs, the blood, the mind. And outside, the snow falls again. Always. Morning arrives not as light, but as a shift in the shade of grey leaking through the window covering. Another day has begun. Another round of labour awaits. You force yourself to sit up again, your joints frozen stiff. Every motion feels exaggerated in your own mind. You imagine yourself rising like an ancient wooden puppet, limbs creaking under invisible weights. Your skin is cracked at the knuckles. Dried blood filling the small valleys your flesh can no longer keep sealed. The fire is nearly dead. You kneel before it automatically, clear the ash, blow gently on the last ember, feed it, coax it, control it. The steps have become as automatic as breathing. The fire responds slowly, timidly, before catching again in weak, reluctant flames. The children remain huddled beneath the layered cloth, their breath still rising visibly. Their faces are thinner. Your wife stirs, rubbing at her swollen fingers, staring at the dim light that leaks into the room. Neither of you speak. You both know today will be harder than the one before. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that lives only in winter, not the exhaustion of hard work, but the exhaustion of sameness. Each day is identical in its hardship. There's no variation to distract you, no change to break the rhythm. The repetition itself grinds you down. After your morning meal, thin as always, you prepare for the day's labour. The storm has piled the snow higher again overnight. What little path you cleared yesterday has disappeared entirely, buried beneath fresh drifts. The snowbanks near your door now rise above your chest. The wind has carved them into hard ridges, jagged and sharp. Each drift is a small mountain that mocks your efforts. You begin to shovel. The wooden spade strikes the crust of ice with a sharp crack, sending up small shards that sting your face as the wind kicks them sideways. You lift heavy, wet clumps of snow and toss them aside, each motion sending a spike of pain through your lower back. The air burns your throat with every breath, and your hands grow numb within minutes, even beneath the worn layers of cloth and leather. The sky is the same flat, endless grey. There is no sun. There hasn't been for days. The world has collapsed into a monochrome prison. The only colour comes from the small flecks of blood that occasionally smear your gloves when the skin on your knuckles splits again. As you dig, your mind drifts into that dangerous blankness that winter invites. Not quite thought, not quite dream, but a grey emptiness that matches the sky. You cannot afford to lose yourself in it for long. That way lies mistakes, and mistakes in winter are often permanent. You clear the path slowly, one stubborn foot at a time, eventually reaching the well once more. The ice covering its mouth is thicker now, a hard, glassy disc nearly as thick as your forearm. You swing the iron bar with practiced strikes, listening to the dull thuds echo into the stillness. The final strike cracks through, splitting the ice into jagged sheets that float momentarily before being swallowed again by the dark water beneath. You lower the bucket carefully, feeling the brittle rope strain under the weight. The water rises slowly as you draw it up. Even this small victory comes at a cost. Your hands burn from cold as you grip the wet rope, the moisture freezing your gloves into stiff claws. The jug beside you rattles as you pour the water inside, the surface immediately crystallizing around the edges. You shoulder the jug and begin the long march back to the house, your boots sinking with each heavy step. The snow collapses beneath your feet like an endless series of weak promises. The wind tugs at your cloak, pushing you sideways, threatening to knock you off balance. Once inside, you set the water by the fire and begin again. There is always something that needs doing. The barn requires another check. The animals are restless today, even more so than usual. Hunger does that to them, just as it does to you. The goats are thin, their ribs visible beneath the patchy winter coats that failed to thicken enough before the cold came. They bleat constantly now, as if calling for food you no longer have. The cow stands silently, her head low, steam rising from her nostrils in thin threads as she breathes. You check her legs for signs of frostbite. Her hooves are brittle, but intact, for now. The chickens barely move beneath their matted bedding, conserving what little energy they have left. You ration out the remaining feed, mixing in more straw and grain now, knowing it provides little real nutrition, but something for the animals to chew. The goats gnaw at the dry stalks frantically, mouths working without pause. You watch them as you work, your chest tightening. You can feel the end of your reserves approaching. In better years, you might have traded with neighbours, pooled resources to carry each other through lean times. But this winter has punished everyone equally. There is nothing to spare. The village is silent now, not just from the storms, but from scarcity. Each family hoards what little remains, their eyes hollow and suspicious. You leave the barn slowly, your muscles weak, your breath ragged. The wind has shifted again while you worked. Colder now, sharper. The sky has darkened slightly, heavy with the weight of yet another coming snowfall. You know the signs. Another storm is building. The labour never ends. You move next to the roof. The heavy snow accumulating above threatens the structure itself. Every winter brings the danger of collapse. You've seen it happen. Entire families buried beneath fallen thatch, the brittle beams snapping under the silent weight of relentless snowfall. With your wooden ladder unsteady beneath you, you climb carefully, each step a test of balance as the wind pushes against your back. At the edge of the roof, you work the long-handled rake across the thatch, pulling loose snow in heavy cascades that tumble to the ground below. The work is slow, dangerous. The ice beneath your feet makes each movement precarious. One misstep could send you tumbling from the roof into the hard drifts below, if you're lucky. If you're not, into something harder beneath. You continue anyway, because the labour cannot stop, because winter never does. The snow tumbles from the edge of the roof like powdered stone, landing in dull, heavy heaps below. You pause for a moment, your legs trembling under you from the strain of balance, the cold slicing through the soles of your worn boots and biting your ankles like gnawing teeth. Even this moment of stillness costs you. The cold slips deeper, numbing your toes, creeping into your knees, travelling up your spine like the slow rise of a winter's tide inside your very bones. Above, the clouds churn slowly. In the air smells of fresh snow, that sharp, faintly metallic scent that promises more labour tomorrow. You have come to recognise that scent like an omen. It rarely lies. Your breath wheezes softly as you carefully descend the ladder, each rung an act of caution. The wood is slick beneath your hands. You clutch the sides tightly as your fingers, stiff and swollen, strain to hold your weight. The ground accepts you with a dull thump. For a moment you feel dizzy. You steady yourself against the wall of your hovel, closing your eyes, waiting for your balance to return. You glance back up at the roof. It's not safe, but it's safer. For now. Another small victory, bought at the price of your muscles and what little heat you have left. By the time you return inside, the fire has burned low again. Your wife has kept it alive, feeding it with small kindling gathered from near the barn. Broken twigs, brittle and dry, scavenged carefully over days. The good firewood remains stacked in a corner, guarded like treasure. Its presence in the room is almost ceremonial, like a final defence you're reluctant to deploy too early. You sit heavily by the hearth, pulling off your outer layers. The cloth is stiff with frozen moisture. The wool is crusted with frost around your collar and sleeves. Your gloves peel away from your hands with a soft, tearing sound where the dampness has frozen them to your skin. Your hands are pale, the tips nearly white, your knuckles a web of red fissures. You hold them out to the fire, watching the blood return in waves of sharp, stabbing pain. Your wife wraps them gently with a dry cloth, pressing her own cracked hands around yours to share what little warmth she can. Outside, the snow begins again. Small, deliberate flakes this time, not the heavy, punishing sheets from the last storm, but a steady fall, indifferent and unending. The sky glows faintly as night approaches, the soft reflection of moonlight bleeding through the thick clouds. The children sit quietly nearby, huddled together beneath their shared blanket. They whisper softly to each other, not in play, but in that way children do when hunger makes them restless, and they attempt to distract themselves from the sharp gnawing in their stomachs. Your youngest reaches out toward the fire with small, open hands, instinctively seeking the warmth that flickers so weakly before her. You pull her closer, wrapping her in your arms, letting her settle against your chest, where your own body heat might offer her more comfort than the fire can. The stew simmers again, as it has every evening. The same thin broth of barley, the last of the turnips, and a few withered beans from the bottom of the sack. Your wife ladles it into bowls carefully, dividing it with mechanical precision. Each person receives just enough to stave off the worst of the hunger, just enough to keep standing. You chew slowly, savouring the warmth more than the taste. The texture is like glue. The turnips are soft but flavourless. The beans are tough, but the salt, though sparing, brings a faint relief. The salt was traded months ago, when you still had enough dried meat to barter for it. Now, only a small pouch remains, guarded like gold. After the meal, you mend again. There's always something to repair. The constant friction of daily survival tears at everything. Clothing, tools, even the walls themselves. You stitch the seam of your boot where it split again, pushing the bone needle through thick leather, your fingers clumsy from the chill. Each stitch is crooked, uneven, but sufficient. Your wife patches the children's shirts, working by dim lamplight, her eyes red-rimmed from strain. The thread is made from unravelling old garments, twisted together, fragile but functional. When this thread runs out, there will be nothing to replace it. Your mother coughs again. The sound is weaker tonight. You glance toward her corner, where she lies beneath layers of old blankets. Her face is pale, her breath shallow. The small cup of thin broth she sipped earlier sits untouched beside her. She has little strength left to eat. The fever has been growing for days. Your wife kneels beside her occasionally, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, whispering prayers under her breath. You hear her words, though you pretend not to. They are not prayers for healing anymore. They are prayers for peace. Outside, the wind grows stronger again. The house creaks under the pressure. The thatch shifts and groans with every gust. The walls shudder as the wind forces itself through the smallest gaps, curling around your feet like a breath from some invisible beast circling your home. You listen to the wind. You always listen to the wind. It carries with it every threat winter holds. The whisper of new storms, the distant howl of wolves, the groan of snow shifting along rooftops, the sharp crack of frozen branches surrendering to the weight of ice. It is a language you've learned to understand. You add a small piece of wood to the fire, carefully selected, carefully measured. One more log burned, one fewer in your dwindling pile. The flame strengthens, throwing shaky shadows against the walls. The children drift to sleep, their bodies curled together beneath the blankets. Your wife pulls them closer, tucking the cloth around them, her hands moving gently, automatically. She glances at you and offers a faint, tired smile, not from joy, but from solidarity. The night stretches long ahead. You do not expect to sleep deeply. You rarely do. The fire needs tending through the dark hours. The cold will threaten to extinguish it if you turn away for too long. The roof may need clearing again tomorrow. The snow will fall through the night, and the drifts will rise higher by morning. The water will freeze again in the well. The animals will grow weaker. The food will run lower. And still, you will rise. You will shovel. You will chop. You will mend. You will feed. You will carry water. You will scrape ice from buckets. You will clear snow from your roof, your path, your breath. Because the labour never stops. Because winter never rests. Because survival demands everything. And tomorrow, like today, like yesterday, you will give it, Bill. The cold may be merciless, but it is at least honest. It comes for everyone, whether poor or rich, strong or weak. It makes no deals. It takes no bribes. The snow falls on lord and peasant alike. But men? Men are not as fair as winter. Even here, in the grinding monotony of endless cold, in the silence of the frozen world, the weight of your place in the world never leaves you. The bite of wind on your face is sharp, but it's nothing compared to the daily bite of knowing who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. You are a peasant, a serf. The word is simple, short, but it defines everything. Your land is not your own. It never was. The patch of frozen earth where your hovel leans, the narrow strip of field that lies dormant under snow, even the trees that provide you with scant firewood, they belong to your lord. Every branch you burn, every seed you plant, every beast you raise, all of it exists under permission, and permission can be revoked. You owe him labour, rent, loyalty, taxes that do not stop, even when the grain bins are empty, even when your children cough in the night from hunger and cold. The winter does not pause for your suffering, neither does your lord, and even in the dead of winter, his men still arrive. You hear them before you see them, the heavy crunch of boots across snow, the low voices, the jingle of bridles and steel buckles as they ride into the village. The sound cuts through the usual silence like a blade. You step outside as they approach, your breath thick in the frigid air. The sky above is heavy with new snow clouds, but the air is still for now. The horses snort clouds of steam, their coats thick with frost. They wear layers of fur and fine wool, thick cloaks clasped with iron brooches. Their boots are sturdy, made of tanned hide, stitched tightly against the cold. The leaders' gloves are lined with fox fur. The wealth of their station clings to them in every detail. The steward rides at the front. Not your lord himself, of course. The lord does not bother to lower himself into these villages during winter. His men handle the dirty work. The steward's eyes sweep across the small cluster of hovels, pausing at each, calculating. His face is clean-shaven, his beard trimmed. He smells faintly of oil and herbs, luxuries you haven't touched since summer. Behind him ride two armed men, lean, cold-eyed, wrapped in dark wool. Swords hang at their sides, and one carries a long staff tipped with iron. Their presence serves no real purpose beyond reminder. The weapons are not needed. Fear is enough. You lower your gaze as they approach. Everyone does. The village grows smaller under their eyes. Neighbours watch silently from doorways, faces pale beneath their hoods, eyes darting nervously as the steward dismounts. "We come to take stock," he announces, his voice unnaturally loud against the stillness of the snow. No one responds, no one dares. His assistant begins listing names, reading from a roll of parchment, his breath steaming as he calls each family forward. You hear your own name soon enough, your family name, tied forever to this patch of land and its obligations. You step forward with your wife just behind you, your children peeking from the doorway. The steward eyes you briefly, noting your sunken cheeks, the dark circles beneath your eyes, the stiffness in your limbs. You are not his concern. Only your numbers are. "How much barley remains?" he asks. You answer truthfully. Lying would serve no purpose. He writes it down. How many animals still live? You give the number. 1 cow, 2 goats, 5 chickens. He nods, as if these figures are acceptable or disappointing or both. He does not say. He moves on. Your wife stands silently beside you, clutching your sleeve. Her hands tremble in the cold, but not from cold alone. She knows as well as you what these visits mean. The steward moves down the list, measuring the village's survival not by human suffering, but by inventory. Every animal, every sack of grain, every tool capable of producing wealth for your lord is accounted for. At the end of his inspection, he gives instructions. Taxes will still be collected in spring, regardless of what remains. If livestock numbers are too low, you will owe more in labour. If your harvest is too poor, you may be ordered to assist your neighbours in their fields, or worse, conscripted for repairs to the Lord's manor or his endless roadworks. He says it without cruelty, but also without mercy. It is simply how things are. Your labour is not your own. Your time is not your own. Even your winter, brutal as it is not your own. The steward mounts his horse again. His men follow. The crunch of hooves resumes as they ride out, their business here complete. Their furs flap gently behind them like flags of a kingdom you will never touch. When they vanish into the snow beyond the village, the silence returns. But it is not a peaceful silence. It is a hollow one, filled with that old, familiar weight, humiliation. Because winter is not only about the cold, it is about powerlessness. Even as you chop wood with frozen fingers, even as you carry water across broken paths, even as you coax a dying fire to life, you carry the knowledge that none of it truly belongs to you. You may endure the winter. You may scrape by another season. But you do not own your survival. You rent it. And the rent will always come due. The steward's visit lingers long after the hoof prints have been covered by new snow. That's how power works here. It doesn't need to stay. It plants itself in your mind and grows there like frostbite in your bones. Even as you return to your daily labour, splitting frozen logs or shoveling snow from the barn roof, the heavy silence of that visit follows you. And not just you. Everyone in the village carries it. The villagers no longer speak as they once did in autumn. There are no gatherings by the well, no idle conversations while threshing grain, no children laughing in the open fields. Now, words are kept short, heads are kept down, and eyes scan the distance whenever a rider approaches. The steward may have left, but the Lord's authority remains like an invisible mist settled over the village. The village itself is small, no more than 20 hovels scattered round the central well and small chapel. Every family is like yours, scraping by, surviving under the same weight. There is no middle class here. There are only those above you, and the rest of you beneath. Even the priest, Father Amen, though clothed in finer wool and sheltered in his slightly larger home, answers to the same hierarchy. His sermons speak of patience, humility and submission. Always submission. God's will, the Lord's will, the same in practice. He preaches salvation in the afterlife, but offers no comfort for the hunger in your belly or the weight of your obligations. Once a week, you and the other villagers still gather for Mass, not because you are comforted, but because absence would be noticed. The church bell rings hollow in the frozen air, its sound muffled by snow, summoning you into the small stone building whose walls drip with damp cold, even as the fire sputters weakly inside. You sit on wooden benches, your breath curling upwards like incense, as Father Amon reads from Scripture. His voice echoes against the bare stone walls, speaking of humility before God, obedience to your betters, the virtue of endurance through suffering. He tells you the poor are blessed, that your reward awaits in heaven. You nod when required, bow your head when told, and whisper your prayers with chapped lips. But your thoughts, like those of your neighbours, remain anchored in the cold reality outside. Heaven is distant. The winter is immediate. After Mass, Father Amon accepts offerings, small bags of barley, thin coins, dried herbs, whatever can be spared. Even now, even here, your labour feeds not only your Lord, but your church. The priest serves both God and the man who owns your land. You've learned long ago there's little difference between the two in this life. The humiliation of your station doesn't always come from cruelty. Often, it arrives through indifference. The Lord does not need to shout at you, nor strike you down. His power is more complete than that. It shapes your entire existence. It decides how much you eat, where you live, what you wear, who you marry, what you owe, and who your children will become. Your father lived as a serf, your grandfather before him. Your children will inherit the same frozen fields, the same cold roof, the same bargain struck generations ago. Even your marriage, blessed as it is by your wife's quiet strength, was not fully your choice. The families agreed. The Lord's permission was sought. The priest oversaw it. Love is permitted here, but only after the obligations have been satisfied. Your children were born beneath the same agreement, baptized quickly to ensure their souls, but marked forever as tenants of this land, property of the Lord, as surely as your goats or chickens. Their small hands already know the feel of cold stone, rough wood, and stiff leather. They will learn hunger as easily as they learn language. The seasons change, but the structure does not. Even in winter, when survival consumes every waking moment, there are reminders. The steward's tally lists hang in the manor house several miles from here. Ledgers full of your debts, your yields, your shortfalls. And when spring arrives and the snow finally melts into thick rivers of mud, the reeves will arrive again to collect. You know how the collections go? You've seen your neighbours brought low before. You've watched a family's only ox seized when they could not pay the harvest tax, leaving them to pull their own plough through the fields with frayed ropes tied around their shoulders. You've seen storehouses raided when debts remained unpaid, dried beans, salted meat, even tools stripped away until nothing remained but a patch of dirt and trembling hands. The humiliation of poverty is not only in having less, it in being reminded constantly that your survival hangs by a thread someone else holds. You do not own your labour. You do not own your harvest. You do not own your home. You work, you serve, you kneel, because you were born into this, and in winter there is no strength left to question it. The cold crushes rebellion as easily as it freezes water. Even the fiercest heart grows brittle when food runs out, when children cry, when fires burn low. Winter makes obedience feel like survival, and that is the cruelest trick of all. And yet, even among those like you, the poor, the frozen, the starving, there are layers. You live near the edge of the village, in your one-room hovel, but some live closer to the centre, closer to the well, closer to the tiny stone chapel. Those places are slightly better. The winds find fewer cracks. The drifts settle a little lower. The steward's visits are a little shorter. The assessments a little less severe. You see them, these other villagers, the slightly less poor. Their goats are fatter. Their children wear one extra layer of wool. Their roofs sag slightly less beneath the snow. They are peasants, yes, but they have managed, through years of careful alliances, marriages, small trades, or simply better fortune, to inch themselves 1 or 2 rungs above you. Their firewood stacks are higher. Their salted meat stores last a little longer. When illness strikes their households, they may have herbs that you do not. And though they share your prayers and kneel beside you during Mass, their eyes slide over you differently, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with the quiet, heavy knowledge that your margin for failure is thinner than theirs, that if the harvests fail entirely next year, you may beg from them, not the other way around. Their wives trade in the village square with a little more confidence. Their children don't always arrive at Mass with red, swollen hands from exposure. They are not nobility. They still owe rent. They still break their backs in frozen fields. But when the steward visits, he looks at their ledgers a little longer, nods a little more approvingly, and rides away with fewer words. And in this tiny world where even survival is rationed, those small advantages feel enormous. You have seen what happens when families fall beneath even your station. At the farthest edge of the village lives the widow martyr, whose husband died 2 winters ago when the snow collapsed his barn roof onto his chest. She has no livestock now, no sons old enough to work her field. Her children's eyes are dark and sunken with hunger far deeper than your own. Her hovel leans dangerously to one side, the roof barely holding against the weight of the snow. Each week she sends her children into the woods, gathering twigs, fallen branches, sometimes returning with nothing but icy bark. She burns everything, even dried manure, even the rotten straw from the barn ruins. Anything that will smoulder long enough to keep her children breathing through the night. Her debt to the steward grows with every passing month. You see her sometimes near the well, her thin frame wrapped in tattered layers, her eyes refusing to meet yours. She speaks little now. The other villagers avoid her in quiet, instinctive ways. She is a reflection of what everyone fears becoming, and thus she becomes invisible. In the rigid hierarchy of your world, there are few paths down, but they are steep and fast. One bad harvest, one harsh winter, one illness. You could find yourself where she stands, or worse, outcast entirely. Because beyond the peasants, beyond even the widows and beggars, are those who lose everything. The ones who wander. The ones who do not belong to any manor or village. You see them sometimes in the distance. Shadows moving through the forest at night, slipping between trees like ghosts. Vagabonds, runaways, thieves. Entire families cast out from their lands, fleeing debts or punishment. Seeking scraps of food in the wilderness where wolves already rule. Their eyes shine like animal eyes when the moonlight catches them, watching your village from the tree line, but never daring to come too close. They are neither alive nor dead, simply lingering at the edge of civilization, waiting for some miracle or for death to claim them quietly in the woods. The steward calls them criminals. Father Amon calls them sinners. But you know what they really are, reminders. You have what they lost, barely. And so, like everyone else here, you bow your head, you endure your share of labour, you keep your place. Not because you believe your position fair, but because you know how thin the ice beneath you truly is. You've seen it crack beneath others. And winter is always waiting to pull you down into the water. There are moments, brief, uninvited, when you imagine what life might be without these layers, without the steward's lists, without the Lord's taxes, without the priest's sermons about suffering as virtue, without the constant looming threat that any slip, any failure, any bad turn of the weather might send you falling out of your place entirely. But the thought dies quickly, because you know better. This is not a world that allows ambition to take root in soil this cold. Even among those few rare souls who dream of something different, winter is a brutal teacher. It reminds you each morning that there is no safety beyond the structure you were born into. You know your place because the cost of not knowing it is visible everywhere. In martyrs' starving children, in the frozen bodies found at the edges of the woods when spring finally returns. Sometimes you hear stories, whispers carried in from distant travellers, of rebellion far away, of peasants rising up, of lords brought low. But those are stories for warmer places, for towns you will never see, for kingdoms whose names change while your life stays frozen. Here, the hierarchy holds like ice on the river, thick, rigid, and dangerous to test. And when the snow falls heavy, it presses everyone further into their roles. Even your children know this already. Your eldest, barely old enough to work, helps gather kindling in the forest's edge. He carries the small branches back like treasure, his thin arms trembling under the weight of frozen wood. He does not complain. He does not speak of fairness. He only asks you, cautiously, quietly, whether this will be enough for the night. You tell him yes, because there is nothing else to say. Your wife never speaks of what she's given up. She once dreamed of growing herbs to sell in the warmer months. Tiny bundles of mint, thyme, and sage carefully cultivated in the small plot behind your hovel. She spoke of trading them in the village for extra cloth or salt. But when last summer's drought stunted the herbs, and the barley harvest fell short, every scrap of her small garden was turned under to plant food instead. Even dreams here are planted, harvested, and eaten to survive. She no longer speaks of the herb garden. Now she mends, she cooks, she tends the animals. She watches the children's faces for signs of fever or frostbite. She counts the dwindling grain as carefully as you count the logs. Her labour is quiet but endless. And like you, she knows exactly who owns the fruits of that labour. The lord who lives miles away in a stone manor you've never entered. You've seen it only from a distance. The pointed towers, the warm glow of torchlight through real glass windows. Glass? Warmth sealed behind polished panes, while you stuff animal hides into the cracks of your window holes. His storerooms are full even now, you're sure of it. Barrels of salted fish, casks of mead, piles of firewood stacked higher than your roof. His larders will not run empty. His children will not fall asleep hungry. His servants will not scrape frost from the inside of their walls each morning. You will never set foot inside that hall, not unless summoned to labour or punishment. And even then, you would enter through the servant's door, always bending your head as you cross the threshold, always standing at a distance, always watching but never touching. The humiliation of your life is not loud. It's not shouted at you daily. It's quiet, subtle. It's in how you lower your eyes when the steward rides past. It's in how you address Father Amen with your reverence, while knowing your offering is smaller than your neighbour's. It's in how you pass the better-fed villagers near the well and feel your ribs more sharply under your skin than they do. It's in how the children from the slightly wealthier huts wear boots fully intact while you wrap your children's feet in extra cloth, and pray the snow doesn't soak through before the sun sets. It's in knowing that no matter how hard you work, no matter how early you rise, no matter how many hours you spend in the woods gathering firewood, how many times you rake snow from your roof, you will never be closer to those warm halls of stone than you were the day you were born. Because your labour does not lift you. It sustains your place beneath the boot that rests gently, perpetually on your back. Winter only sharpens that weight. Every day you labour against the cold, but the structure of your world does not bend to your work. It stands above you, unchanging, indifferent. And in winter, when hunger gnaws deeper and sickness prowls closer, you are reminded of it constantly. And yet, you endure. Not because the system is just, not because your position is secure, but because winter offers no room for pride, no energy for rebellion, no space for anger. Only the next task, the next breath, the next night survived. You endure because endurance is all that winter allows. And beyond the cold, beyond the hunger, beyond the snow that falls without end, humiliation remains, sitting like another silent passenger beside you, always watching, always waiting. Because in medieval winter, even your dignity freezes slowly. In winter, belief becomes its own kind of fuel. Not the belief that spring will come, though you tell yourself that too, but deeper beliefs, older ones, the kind woven into your bones by centuries of mouths whispering the same stories beside dying fires. Belief is what carries you through a world that offers no mercy. The Church says suffering purifies the soul. Father Amon reminds you of this every Sabbath, standing before the frozen congregation, his breath curling toward the rafters as he preaches from a book too fine for your hands to ever touch. He tells you that the Lord sees your struggles, that the Lord tests the faithful with hardship, that your hunger, your labour, your losses, they are seen, and if you endure them well, you will be rewarded after death, always after death. And you nod, and you kneel, and you whisper your quiet amends, not because you feel closer to heaven, but because belief gives shape to the misery. Because it's better to imagine that your suffering has meaning than to face the possibility that it doesn't. And the Church is not alone in its grip. The land itself speaks in its own old language, in the cracking of trees under ice, in the howl of wolves, in the sharp silence of frozen nights. The world you live in is not only harsh, it's alive. It watches you, and like all living things in winter, it hungers. Your ancestors knew this well, long before Father Amon arrived to build his chapel and ring his bells. The old stories still survive in whispers, not spoken openly, not with the priest nearby, but round fires late at night when the wind howls too long and the moon glows too full. Stories of spirits in the woods who steal children lost in snowstorms. Stories of frost demons who slip through the cracks at night and sit on your chest while you sleep, sucking warmth from your breath. Stories of the White Lady who wanders the fields during deep freezes, weeping for those who starve and luring desperate souls into the blizzards where their frozen bodies are found days later, faces frozen mid-scream. The priest calls these stories pagan lies, but you've seen too many strange things in the woods to dismiss them entirely. And besides, when the wind screams like it did last night, rattling your thin walls, pulling at the door like skeletal hands, it's hard not to believe that something darker stalks the land alongside the cold. You believe not because it's logical, but because winter itself makes logic feel small. You light candles before icons when you can spare the tallow, whispering prayers not just to saints, but to older names you dare not speak too loudly. You hang small charms above your door, tiny wooden crosses, sprigs of dried herbs, bits of iron wire twisted into protective knots. These protections cost nothing, and they soothe in ways the priest's distant sermons do not, because when the wind howls like wolves circling your hovel, and the fire sputters low, and you hear strange creaks above your head, you don't argue theology. You pray to whatever might listen. Even the animals seem to sense things you cannot. The goats huddled together, low to the ground, their eyes wide and fixed toward shadows beyond the barn door. The chickens fall silent on certain nights, as if hearing voices you cannot hear. The cow snorts and shifts uneasily, as though something unseen paces just outside her stall. Your wife crosses herself often, but not always in Father Amon's fashion. Sometimes her fingers brushed a small charm around her neck. A carved piece of oak her grandmother once gave her, whispered over during childbirth to keep death at bay. You've seen the same talismans in other homes. Small bundles of dried rowan berries, strips of red cloth tied around windows, pins driven into thresholds to block evil. They are not sanctioned by the church, but they remain. Because in winter, all protections feel worth having. The culture that holds your village together in winter isn't written in books. It isn't debated in halls. It lives in rituals. Quiet, repetitive, almost invisible. You follow them because they are inherited, not questioned. In winter especially, these tiny habits feel like the only lines drawn against chaos. Every morning, before you step outside into the crushing cold, you tap twice on the wooden beam beside your door. It's an old habit. Your father did it. His father did too. It was never explained fully. But somehow, the rhythm, tap, tap, feels like a bargain with the elements. A request for safe passage through the frozen world beyond your threshold. You don't forget to do it. Not in winter. Never in winter. At the well you speak softly while drawing water. Not full prayers, just whispered words of thanks. Promises to return the favour when spring comes, even though you don't know to whom you speak. The water beneath the ice is a gift and a danger. You've seen what happens when the rope snaps, or when someone slips. The well swallows people whole sometimes. At night, when the fire burns low, and your wife tucks the children into their shared blanket, she whispers over them, not prayers from the chapel, but words older than scripture. She calls them the old blessings, for health, for warmth, for protection against the unseen. The other villagers do the same, though none of you speak about it openly. These are not customs you discuss. They are simply part of being alive in a place that does not care whether you live or die. Even the seasons have their rituals of control. In summer, you bring small offerings to the fields before planting. A few drops of mead poured into the soil. A broken piece of bread buried beneath the first furrow. In autumn, during the last harvest, you leave a small bundle of wheat tied near the forest's edge, for the spirits of the woods, so they remain satisfied through winter, and do not wander too near your door. The church calls these things superstitions. Father Amon preaches against them, his voice firm even as the winter draughts slip beneath his robes during Mass. He speaks of one God, of proper worship, of sin disguised as old tradition. But Father Amon sleeps under stone walls, behind heavy doors, in a house built warmer than yours. The wind does not call to him the way it calls to you in the blackest part of the night. The cold does not sit at the edge of his bed like a weight pressing on his chest. The wolves do not gather outside his door, so the old ways survive, not because you defy the church, but because you hedge your bets. Because when your child's skin grows pale from fever, you will pray in the chapel and still leave a sprig of rosemary beneath her pillow. Because when the snowstorm howls for 3 nights, you will cross yourself and still whisper to the dark corners of your home, asking unseen forces to spare your roof another collapse. Because faith, here, is not a single road, it's a web. You cling to every thread, because any one of them might hold you a little longer. And beyond your village, the forest waits, ancient, cold, full of teeth. You have walked its edges many times, gathering firewood, hunting in better seasons. You know its paths, and you know where not to walk after dusk. There are places in the woods that even the bravest hunters avoid. The old stories speak of creatures there, of things that move beneath the snow, long, pale shapes that whisper in voices not quite human, of frozen shadows that trick travellers into circling deeper into the trees until the cold takes them. You've never seen these creatures, but you've seen footprints that don't belong to any beast you know. You've heard noises that don't belong to wolves or owls, and when you pass certain ancient trees, twisted, blackened, their branches heavy with ice, you feel the weight of unseen eyes following you through the falling snow. You leave small offerings there too, just in case. A bit of bread, a silver button, a few whispered words. You do not speak of these things in the village, but no one mocks you for them, because in winter, even doubt freezes, and belief, any belief, might keep you alive. Culture in your world is not something you wear like a garment. It is sewn directly into your skin, layer after layer, as surely as the cold wraps itself around your bones. It governs not only how you pray, but how you eat, how you speak, how you work, how you survive. And in winter, everything sharpens. Customs that felt like simple tradition in warmer months now feel like necessities, as though breaking them would anger forces already hostile enough. Even your speech changes. Words grow shorter in winter. Conversations are clipped, practical, weighted by breath that fogs between you. There is no energy for idle talk, no room for long stories when your face burns from the wind and your fingers ache beneath your gloves. Neighbours pass each other on narrow paths through the drifts, offering only small nods or muttered blessings. Keep warm. Safe winds to you. May the roof hold. No one says, "How are you?" in winter. The answer is already known. You greet your neighbours because not greeting would be dangerous. Isolation in winter breeds suspicion, and suspicion grows fast beneath snow-covered roofs. Small slights, a missing portion of shared grain, a failed favour, a harsh word spoken too late at night, can fester like wounds in the cold, because there is nothing else to think about. The snow buries more than fields. It buries distractions. It leaves behind only the tight circle of your survival and the heavy presence of everyone else enduring alongside you. So you maintain peace through rituals, shared labour at the well, exchanged small favours, polite silences. You trade a few eggs for a handful of dried herbs. You help mend a neighbour's roof in exchange for help clearing your own. You share a dead goat's hide rather than see it rot. These exchanges are not charity, they are currency. Because when the snow falls harder, you may need their help again. And if hunger sharpens beyond endurance, you may need mercy. The priest sometimes speaks of charity, but charity is thin in winter. Here, survival depends less on grace and more on memory. People remember who gave, who withheld, who carried burdens without complaint. In the spring, when the thaw comes, those memories blossom like seeds planted beneath the snow. You've seen feuds simmer beneath the surface like coals beneath ash. You've seen neighbours who once shared fields stop speaking after disputes over firewood or debts. You've seen entire families leave villages over grievances too old to fully explain. The rules of your world are rarely written, but they are enforced by all. And above all those quiet rules stands the most unspoken: never draw attention from above. The steward's visits, even in winter, are dangerous not just because of what he takes, but because of what he sees. If he sees one man with more than his share of firewood, questions may follow. If he sees a family with too many goats, accusations may spread. If he sees signs of hidden grain stores, punishments may arrive before spring. Surplus is not safety here. Surplus is risk. You have learned to hide any small fortune carefully, lest your stability become someone else's opportunity. Even small joys are carried out in secret. Your wife hums old songs quietly while cooking, songs her grandmother taught her, not the hymns of Father Amen, but tunes that speak of warmth, of sunlit fields, of long-forgotten saints who blessed the earth before the church arrived. You sometimes catch your children tracing patterns in the frost on the windows, old symbols, circles and crosses you half remember from your own youth. Protective signs. Symbols meant to ward off sickness, to shield against bad dreams. Father Amen would scold them if he saw it, but Father Amen sleeps behind stone walls. He does not sit by a failing fire, watching his children's breath fog the room. And so the old symbols remain, quiet, hidden, passed on because they feel like armour. Even your meals carry culture within them. In summer, you eat what you grow: barley, cabbage, turnips, leeks. In autumn, you store what you can, salting meat, drying apples, stacking roots deep in the earth. But in winter, meals shrink. Porridge stretches thinner. The salted meat grows tougher as the weeks pass. Soups become little more than flavoured water with a few floating vegetables. Yet even these meagre meals follow inherited rules. The last piece of bread is never taken without offering it first to another. The salted fish is always shared evenly. The pickled cabbage is saved for days when illness creeps near. Rationing becomes a form of ritual, not just to preserve supplies, but to maintain dignity. To show your children that even when hunger gnaws, you still carry yourself with order. Culture becomes the thin thread separating survival from desperation. It gives shape to the shapeless misery of winter. Without these rules, these quiet, inherited habits, you fear what you might become. Because you've seen those who break beneath the cold. You've seen families fracture as hunger sharpens into anger. You've seen men grow violent when the snow traps them too long beneath their roofs. You've seen wives vanish into the forest rather than watch their children starve. And you've seen what happens when belief, any belief, collapses entirely. They wander the woods now. You sometimes hear them at night, far beyond the edges of the village, screaming into the blizzard like broken animals. The priest calls them lost souls. You call them warnings. Because when culture breaks, when belief unravels, winter takes everything. When the blizzards roar late at night and the walls of your hovels shake beneath the weight of the wind, it's not your strength that holds you in place. It's the structure of belief that wraps you tighter than your threadbare blankets. Not one belief. Not the clean, simple faith Father Amon speaks of on Sundays, but layers of overlapping truths, woven together like the patched cloth that covers your windows. You believe in God, but you also believe in the old spirits of the forest, in the silent ones who wander the snowdrifts under moonlight, in the strange lights that flicker sometimes beyond the tree line, where no lanterns should be. You believe in saints, in charms, in protective herbs tied above your children's beds. You believe in hunger and cold as living forces, powers to be respected, to be feared. And beneath all of this, you believe in order, not justice, not fairness, but order. A frozen kind of peace that holds the village together like frost clinging to a dying tree branch. Without that invisible order, everything would splinter. The village obeys it instinctively. You see it in the silent agreements between families, in the unspoken understanding of when to speak, and when to remain silent, when to offer a neighbour half your eggs, and when to close your shutters and pretend not to hear their knocking. You see it in how even the worst offenders, those who once stole firewood or hoarded grain, are dealt with not by the steward's sword, but by quiet ostracism. They remain in the village, but unseen. Doors close to them. Conversations fall silent when they approach. Over time, their families wither like branches cut off from the tree's warmth. It is not mercy. It is survival. For to threaten the fragile balance of winter is to threaten everyone. Even Father Amon, despite his sermons and his confident gestures, bows before this deeper law. He knows better than to challenge the old customs directly. He preaches against them, yes, but softly, carefully. He does not knock down the charms above your doors. He does not demand that your wife abandon her whispered blessings as she lays your sick child to sleep. He knows what you know, that winter allows no purists. Belief here is not a rigid wall, but a rope, fraying, patched, pulled from many directions, but still holding. You've clung to that rope your entire life. Your father did, his father before him. Each generation passes down not only the tools for farming and the skills for surviving, but the whispered codes that allow you to endure the unspeakable. What to say when the first child coughs? What herbs to burn when fever rises? What charms to hang when the snow falls heavy? What symbols to carve near the barn door before the storm arrives? What stories to tell when wolves circle too close to the livestock? Even the children know these rituals instinctively. They learn before they can read, before they can count, before they understand the weight of the world pressing down on them. Your eldest son already checks the barn doors at dusk, whispering the words his grandmother taught him, a mixture of prayer and old rhyme. His small hand traces the protective mark you etched into the threshold, a crooked star handed down through too many winters to count. When he does this, you do not correct him. You do not remind him that the priest calls these things foolish. You let him speak his words, because you understand, even if Father Amon never will, that the words matter, whether true or not. They are anchors in a storm that never truly ends. Because the greatest threat in winter is not death, it's hopelessness. It's when hope freezes, when the mind fractures, when men begin to see the cold not as an enemy, but as something to surrender to. That is when they step into the woods and do not return. You've seen that too, A man, strong once, who one morning simply stood up, opened his door, and walked out into a storm. His face calm, his eyes hollow. No coat, no tools, no purpose but to leave. They found him days later, curled beneath a tree, covered in snow, hands frozen into the ground as if trying to dig his way downward. You spoke of him only once after that, in whispers, and then never again, because everyone understood. Even the strongest will fracture when belief breaks. And so you believe. In everything. In anything. In the saints. In the old spirits. In the circle of rituals passed down like breath from dying lungs. You believe because belief is not luxury here. It is insulation. And as the wind rattles your fragile walls tonight, and your fire cracks low, and your wife whispers once more over your sleeping children, you whisper too. Not because you're certain, but because you cannot afford not to. Winter does not just test you, it mocks you. There is a quiet horror in the absurdity of it all, the way you do everything right, and still the cold laughs. You chop your wood before the first frost, stacking it high, carefully drying it. You store your grain in sealed sacks, high on wooden shelves. You gather your roots, your beans, your salted meat. You ration with discipline. You patch your roof before the first snow. You mend your clothes. You prepare. And still, winter finds ways to undo you. You rise one morning to find a thin crack split through your water jug, the cold expanding it overnight, turning clay into a fracture that spills your precious liquid onto the dirt floor. You enter the barn and find one of your goats stiff in the corner, its breath gone in the night while you slept beside your small fire, unaware. You reach into your grain sack and feel the soft powder where mould has quietly taken root, working its way through the stored barley like a parasite, stealing the calories you counted so carefully. The horror isn't always in the grand tragedies. It's in these small betrayals. The way the cold gets inside things. The way it unthreads your plans like rotten cloth. The way it turns preparation into futility. And always the bodies. You find them more often as winter deepens. A bird frozen in mid-flight beneath a drift, its wings locked open like a statue. A fox curled into a hollow beneath a tree, its fur stiff, its eyes filmed over. A neighbour's pig collapsed outside the pen one morning, breath failing before dawn. And sometimes, men. You heard of it last week. A boy from the next village wandering into the woods, lost during a blizzard while collecting firewood. His father followed him out into the storm. Neither returned. The searchers found them days later, locked together beneath the snow, the father's arms wrapped around his son, as though he might still warm him. There was no ceremony, no burial. The ground is frozen solid. They were left beneath the trees, a cairn of snow marking their resting place, until spring allows the earth to open again. That is how death works here. Winter does not allow dignity. Even your animals sense it. The cow grows weaker each morning, her breath coming shallower, her weight dropping as feed grows thinner. The goat's bleats turn hollow, their eyes dull. The chickens barely move now, sitting motionless for hours to conserve what little life remains. You see death in their eyes days before it arrives. You know the signs. You've learned them too well. And when it comes, there's no time for grief. The dead goat becomes meat. The fallen chicken is plucked before it freezes entirely. The cow, if she falls, will be butchered immediately before the meat turns useless in the cold rot that strikes even frozen flesh, if not handled carefully. Horror does not come wearing a monster's face. It comes as quiet choices. It comes as survival. It comes when you stand over your own livestock with a blade, knowing you have no choice but to kill it before winter does it for you. You do not flinch anymore. You cannot. And through it all, the absurdity. The way you chop ice to fetch water, only for it to freeze again before the jug reaches your door. The way you mend your walls, only to feel the wind find a new crack within hours. The way you plan your firewood carefully, only to find yourself burning the broken remains of your own furniture when the logs run out. Yes, you've seen that too. When firewood disappears faster than planned, when storms last longer than they should, you burn what remains. The stool, the shelves, the old cradle your children once slept in, the very beams from the inner walls if you must. You've seen neighbours dismantle their own homes piece by piece to stay alive one more night. And in the morning, when the fire has cooled, they sit within walls that sag inward, roofs one heavy snowfall away from collapse. Their shelter sacrificed to feed the flames that keep their hearts beating. That is the absurdity of winter, burning your home to keep warm inside it. You no longer ask how long winter will last. You stopped counting weeks long ago. The sun rises late, sets early, offers no warmth. The sky remains heavy, endless grey. The clouds a ceiling that presses downwards like the weight of snow upon your chest. The wind claws endlessly at your door, as though trying to remind you, I am still here. Always. The absurdity of winter is that, even while it starves you, it forces you to work harder than any harvest season. Every calorie you burn to shovel snow, to chop frozen wood, to scrape ice from your roof, each one leaves your body a little weaker. Every breath you exhale into the cold is stolen from your chest like payment to the wind. And the work never ends. Snowfall is constant, not always in heavy storms, but in a steady, quiet descent that builds upon itself day after day like a creeping suffocation. The paths you dig vanish overnight. You clear them again by morning, knowing full well that the wind will erase your labour before dusk. The absurdity lies in that rhythm. Shovel, clear, watch it disappear, repeat. You often wonder whether the snow remembers how much you hate it, whether it falls harder just to mock your effort. There is no triumph in your labour, only brief, temporary victories. A clear path for an hour, a bucket of water before it freezes, a small pile of wood before it's devoured by the fire. Even the smallest tasks mock you with their pointlessness. The well freezes again. The rope stiffens with a fresh layer of ice, brittle and fragile. The bucket cracks as thin sheets of frost build inside, forming jagged rings that must be broken by hand. The barn doors swell shut beneath snowdrifts, requiring you to dig your way inside again every morning just to reach the livestock you may soon be forced to slaughter. Your boots stiffen into shapes that no longer resemble your feet. The wet wool lining inside freezes into solid masses, turning each step into a march across knives. And yet, you walk anyway, because there is no alternative. The absurdity is everywhere. You once watched your neighbour spend hours building a small wooden sled to carry firewood back from the forest more efficiently. The next morning, a heavy thaw, followed by an overnight freeze, trapped the sled in a thick coat of ice where it stood. The sled remains there still, frozen in place, completely useless. A monument to wasted hope. Even fire, your one defence, sometimes betrays you. The wood grows damp if not stored perfectly. It smokes. It sputters. The soot collects on the walls of your hovel, turning them black, clinging to your lungs, choking your children as they cough weakly in their sleep. The smoke rises unevenly, slipping through the crude hole cut into the roof. Not a chimney, but a desperate vent, where it meets the cold outside and freezes into long icicle-like growths that hang from the thatch like jagged teeth. Sometimes they snap under their own weight and spear downward toward the ground. You've seen one pierce a chicken once, killing it instantly. You salvage the meat before it froze too hard, because even horror becomes a resource here. You've learned to butcher with speed. The cold preserves meat better than any cellar. If an animal falls, you work quickly, stripping muscle and skin before the flesh turns brittle. You've seen men slice meat from frozen animals with small axes, chipping away at their livestock like lumber, stacking cuts of frozen flesh like firewood. There is no reverence, there is no grief. There is only the race against the cold to make sure nothing is wasted. The horror lives in that transformation, when survival turns death into labour. You've heard of families eating their dead in other villages. Whispered rumours, always denied publicly, but repeated in hushed tones near low fires. Starvation pushes men beyond every line they once swore they would never cross. You understand why. Because while the snow buries the world above, hunger tunnels beneath your ribs like a living thing. It whispers louder with each passing day. And beyond that hunger, beyond the endless labour, is the final absurdity. The cold doesn't care. You can suffer correctly. You can ration. You can pray. You can obey every rule whispered by priest and elder and steward. And still the cold comes. Still the snow falls. Still the wind gnaws through every crack it finds. It is not cruel because cruelty requires intent. The cold simply exists. You are the one giving it meaning. Even sleep is absurd in winter. You would think exhaustion would make sleep easy. But winter is not kind even here. You drift in and out of shallow rest, waking every hour to feed the fire before it dies. The cold presses against your skin the moment the flames dim, creeping into your chest like a slow, heavy fog. You sleep sitting upright often, your back to the hearth, your legs tucked beneath your arms, trying to preserve heat like a coiled animal. The children whimper in their sleep sometimes, their thin bodies shivering even beneath layers of cloth and furs. Your wife wraps them tighter each night, whispering the same words over and over. Her voice is cracked from the dry air, but she never stops whispering. It is not comfort. It is survival. Even your dreams are different in winter. The cold reaches into your mind, twisting your sleep into strange, haunting visions. You dream of warmth sometimes. Fields of green, heavy with barley swaying in summer winds. But the dreams sour quickly. The fields rot. The sky turns black. Snow falls from nowhere, burying you as you run. You wake gasping, your breath clouding in the frozen air. You're not surprised anymore. The dreams come often. You've stopped fearing them. The greater horror is what happens when you wake, because reality feels thinner now. The lines between what is real and what isn't blur. You hear voices sometimes in the wind. Not words, but faint, rhythmic sounds that almost sound like singing. The old women in the village say these are the snow women calling. Spirits that roam the fields at night, singing to the lost, luring them into the white where no one returns. You pretend not to believe it, but you listen carefully when you hear them. One night, while returning from the barn, you saw something that you cannot explain. a figure at the edge of the woods. Still, pale, its face obscured by a cloak of frost. It did not move. It simply stood, half hidden by the blowing snow, watching. You blinked, and it was gone. You told no one. Not because you doubted what you saw, but because you knew no good would come from sharing it. Everyone has seen something. They simply don't speak of it. This is the rule of winter. Don't invite attention from the dark. Don't speak of what watches you at night. Don't name the things that hunger beyond your walls. Because absurdity grows teeth when you give it words. Even within your own home, the cold breeds strange sights. Your breath freezes along the edges of your hair, forming thin white threads that break like glass when touched. The moisture from cooking coats the inner walls with frost that glitters like stars when the firelight flickers. Icicles form beneath the roof inside, thin daggers that drip and freeze again, growing longer each night. Your home becomes both shelter and trap, warm enough to live, cold enough to betray you. You once woke to find a layer of frost across your own blankets. Not snow, not ice, just thin, perfect crystals, as though winter had crept under your roof while you slept, laying its hand gently upon you like a warning. It is difficult to explain the horror of seeing your breath hang motionless in the still air of your own home, frozen mid-movement for a few seconds before collapsing under its own weight, as though even your breath is growing tired, as though even air forgets how to behave normally here, and beneath all of it, beneath the snow, the hunger, the frozen walls, the thin screams carried by wind, is the simplest, cruelest absurdity of all. You chose none of this. You were born here, born into this village, born beneath this system, born beneath this sky, born into a bargain you never agreed to. You did not anger the gods. You did not squander riches. You did not fail. And yet, here you are, measuring every handful of grain, counting every splinter of wood, praying over every ember like it might be your last. You endure because there is no alternative. You endure because your body still moves. You endure because the fire still burns. You endure because the snow, for all its cruelty, has not yet buried you. But you know it watches. Winter waits always. Not with malice, not with rage, but with infinite patience. And that, you realise, may be the most horrifying thing of all. The greatest horror of winter is not death. Death is simple. The horror is that winter teaches you how easily you can disappear. Not just physically, though the snow would do that quickly, but piece by piece. The man you were in autumn, stronger, surer, hopeful in the harvest, begins to dissolve quietly under the daily weight of cold. You do not collapse all at once. You erode. You wake one morning and realise you no longer feel hunger the way you once did. The sharp pangs have dulled into a flat, constant emptiness. A hollow space behind your ribs that no longer complains because it knows no better. You realise you've forgotten the taste of certain things. Butter, fresh bread, warm milk, the sweetness of an apple pulled straight from the tree. They are not simply gone. They feel like stories you heard as a child, half-remembered myths from another life. You catch your reflection in the bucket of thawed water and barely recognise the man staring back. Hollow cheeks, cracked lips, eyes ringed with dark circles, hands that tremble slightly even at rest, veins bulging under skin stretched too thin. Your children do not laugh anymore. They sit close to the fire, quiet and still, speaking only when necessary. They are learning already how to conserve their energy, how to move less, how to want less, how to be small beneath the weight of winter. And yet you work, because to stop would be worse. To stop would mean surrendering to the absurd rules that winter writes in silence. Move, and you may survive. Rest, and you are lost. There is no justice to the cruelty. You've seen strong men fall while weaker men endure. You've seen infants survive while grown women wither. There is no pattern, no mercy, only chance. You once watched The Blacksmith's Apprentice, young, healthy, broad-shouldered, freeze to death within a dozen paces of his own home after a sudden whiteout buried the village for hours. The wind covered him so fast that by the time his father opened the door, there was no trace left but an uneven drift. They dug him out with bare hands. His skin had already turned blue. You helped carry his stiff body inside. You didn't speak. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. And that is how winter strips even grief down to its bones. The absurdity reaches deep into your mind when you sit by the fire at night and feel yourself calculating how much longer you can ration the remaining grain, not just for your children, but for your livestock, for your family's chance at surviving spring. You weigh everything as if lives are numbers. One goat alive means milk. One goat slaughtered means meat for weeks. The cow alive means survival. The cow lost means desperation. And when your wife looks at you across the fire, both of you reading the same grim arithmetic in each other's eyes, you understand that winter teaches you how to choose which parts of life to let go first. The laughter goes first, the comfort goes next. The dignity slowly follows. Even hope, if you're not careful. You once believed spring was a promise. Now you see it as a gamble. Because even if you survive winter's cold, will the harvest survive spring's floods? Will the soil yield enough? Will your tools last through another planting? Will the debts that await after fall consume what little you save? The horror, you realise, is that winter is not a season. It is a cycle, a system, a weight that presses on you long after the snow melts. The absurdity is that even as the ice loosens and rivers flow again, you are never free. You may survive this winter. You may survive the next. But winter will always return. It waits. It always waits. And as you sit in your dim hovel, with the fire flickering low, your wife sewing the same torn sleeve for the 5th time, your children huddled together beneath patched cloth, your mother's faint cough rattling in the dark corner, you whisper the same words beneath your breath. Just one more day, just one more day, just one more day. Because that is all that winter allows. And sometimes, absurd as it is, that is enough. There is a point in winter where the fight begins to leave you. Not in a violent collapse, not all at once, but quietly, in slow, invisible layers. You still work. You still chop, carry, shovel, mend. But the motions no longer feel like acts of survival. They feel like rituals of delay. A way to hold back what is always waiting. You wake not because you're rested, but because the cold has nudged you awake again, whispering its familiar warning. Get up, tend the fire, move, or don't wake again. You obey. But you no longer expect anything beyond the next hour. Time itself has broken into fragments. You no longer think in days or weeks. You think in fires, in buckets of water, in handfuls of grain, in how many logs remain before the pile reaches the dirt. The thought of spring feels less like hope and more like a distant rumour you once heard, the kind of story told by someone who may have lied. Even the light feels different. When the sun does rise, it is not a comfort. It casts long, pale shadows across the drifts, making the snow gleam like sharpened blades. The light reflects in cruel ways, making the world feel colder even beneath the clear sky. The silence grows heavier. At first, the village was filled with quiet activity, the shovels scraping, the axes splitting wood, the low voices of neighbours exchanging small necessities. But now, the sounds have thinned. Some homes remain shuttered for days. The well sees fewer visitors. The trails between houses are narrower, less used, slowly disappearing beneath fresh drifts that no one bothers to clear. You know what that means. Some have given up. Some are too weak to leave their homes. Some may already be dead behind those doors. And yet, the village pretends not to notice, because noticing would demand action. And no one has anything left to give. The absurd civility of autumn, the shared labour, the borrowed tools, the polite nods at the well, has long since eroded. What remains is distance. Even when you see your neighbour passing by, your eyes meet only briefly. There is no exchange of words now, only brief, hollow acknowledgements that say you are still alive, for now. You've stopped asking yourself how much longer this will last. That question holds no value anymore. Now you only ask simpler questions. Is there enough wood for tonight? Is the roof holding? Is anyone feverish? Did the cow stand this morning? Everything else has become weightless. Your world is shrinking hour by hour. The road that once led beyond the village is gone beneath the drifts. Even the trees at the forest's edge seem further away now, as though the world itself is closing in. The sky presses lower each day, as though it too is growing tired. And beneath all of this shrinking world, inside your own chest, something else begins to settle. A numbness deeper than the cold. You stop noticing the sting of wind on your face. You stop noticing the ache in your legs after hours of shoveling. You stop noticing the blood that seeps from cracked fingers when you handle frozen rope. Pain becomes background noise. Hunger becomes background noise. Fear becomes background noise. You exist beneath it, like a man standing at the bottom of a frozen lake, watching the light fade through thick, silent water. Even the fire, once your most desperate concern, becomes less urgent. You watch the flames flicker and shrink, and you don't feel panic. You simply watch. You tell yourself you'll add more wood soon. You know you should. Sometimes you wait longer than you should, daring the fire to die, because a small part of you wants to see what happens when the flame finally gives up. A quiet part of you whispers, would it really be so bad to let go? To stop fighting the wind? To stop chasing warmth you can never keep? To let the cold have what it has always wanted, and then, always, just before the fire fades completely, you stir, you rise, you add a log, you breathe life into the embers again, not because you believe you'll win, but because that's what you do. That's what winter demands. One more breath, one more hour, one more day. You do not endure because of hope. You endure because endurance itself has become your only purpose. The strange thing is, you are still here. When you pause long enough to recognize it, the realization feels almost absurd. The days that were supposed to break you have stacked one on top of another, and yet you remain inside this frail wooden shell, surrounded by snow that could bury you in an afternoon. Your body is no longer strong. Your steps are slower. You no longer walk with the wide strides you took in summer, but with short, careful movements, as though every drift you cross might swallow you whole. Your balance falters more often now. You catch yourself against the doorframe as you leave, leaning into the wind like an old man decades beyond your years. But still, you rise. Your children's faces are thinner, but they breathe. Their bodies shiver at night, but they wake each morning, curling tighter beneath the covers as your wife gently stirs them for the meagre meal that starts the day. The same stew simmers again on the fire. Thin barley, shreds of old salted meat, the last remnants of turnip that are more root than flesh. The bowl is passed from child to child, each carefully scraping the last drops from its edge. Your wife waits to eat, as always. You take the smallest portion as always. The taste no longer matters. The warmth does. The weight in your stomach does. Even the illusion of fullness carries power in winter. You do not speak of spring anymore. The word itself feels dangerous now. To say it aloud would be to summon its delay, as though winter might overhear and choose to punish your impatience. Instead you speak in smaller measures. Tomorrow we'll check the roof again. Tomorrow we'll cut what's left of the ash tree behind the barn. Tomorrow we'll see if the goat stands. Tomorrow is allowed. Tomorrow is small enough not to offend winter, but you have stopped speaking of after. There are moments when you catch your wife staring at the fire with a strange, empty calm, her hands motionless, the needle resting on her lap. She is still sewing, still mending the same garments she has stitched and restitched all winter, but sometimes her fingers go still. Her breath fogs in the dim light. Her eyes reflect the flickering flame, vacant for long minutes before she notices you watching. And when she does, she smiles, softly, sadly. Neither of you speaks of those moments. They are becoming more frequent now. The children are quieter too. Their play, which once filled the air with squeals and laughter, even deep into early winter, has faded entirely. Now they sit in silence, making small toys from bits of scrap, sticks tied with string, carved figures from old firewood, tiny animals moulded from frozen mud. They play without sound, as though afraid that too much noise might weaken the thin walls of warmth that remain inside your home. You do not stop them. Let them save their strength. Even the village animals seem resigned. The cow no longer rises fully when you approach. She lifts her head weakly from the straw, eyes dull, breath shallow. The goats barely bleat anymore, conserving whatever is left of their bodies. The chickens remain in their nesting corner, feathers puffed against one another, unmoving for hours. The silence grows deeper. The world contracts even tighter. You used to walk beyond the edge of the village sometimes, into the woods, into the frozen fields, to feel the expanse of the world stretch around you. You do not do that now. The world has grown too large again, too dangerous. The forest seems to watch you from its white corridors. The snow whispers as you pass, soft and treacherous. You fear losing your footing. You fear the heavy sky closing in. You fear not coming back. And somewhere beneath that fear, buried where you don't dare admit it aloud, there is a quieter thought. Would it really matter? That is winter's final cruelty. Not that it kills, but that it wears you down until even your instinct to survive feels thinner, more fragile, like the ice coating your breath at night. The priest still preaches each Sabbath. His sermons continue, his voice steady, promising salvation, reminding you that your suffering has purpose, that hardship here will be rewarded beyond. You listen, not because you believe him more than before, but because his voice fills the emptiness for an hour. The sound of words, even hollow ones, becomes valuable when silence threatens to crush you. And when he speaks of spring, of rebirth, of sun and green returning to the earth, you do not hope. You simply allow the pictures to form in your mind briefly before releasing them, because winter has taught you not to hold tightly to images of warmth. They break too easily, and broken hope is colder than snow. The collapse isn't loud, it rarely is. You always imagined before that surrender would come like a cry, some breaking point, a shout into the void, a scream into the endless white. But winter is more patient than that. It teaches you that surrender happens slowly, softly, like a candle flickering lower, almost invisible until there's nothing left to burn. Your mind learns how to hide from itself. You catch yourself forgetting entire hours. You'll realise you've been standing for long minutes, staring at the same patch of wall, the same flicker of firelight dancing on the soot-stained beams. Your hands will be frozen to the handle of the wooden spade, your back stiff, your legs burning, but your thoughts will be absent, not asleep, just removed, as if your mind no longer wants to be fully present for what your body is forced to endure. Your wife notices too. You can see it in the way she watches you. Her eyes lingering a few seconds too long when you return from the barn, or when you sit by the fire and stare at your bowl without eating. But she says nothing. You both know that speaking of it would make it real, and neither of you can afford one more real thing right now. Even your conversations are shrinking. There are no plans anymore, no questions about the weeks ahead, no talk of barter or debts. You no longer speak of the coming planting, or the condition of your tools, or the harvest to come. Instead, your words have reduced to inventory. How many logs remain? How much grain is left? How much water was drawn today? How many eggs the hens laid, if any? Numbers. Simple, functional numbers. The rest is silence. Your children seem older now, though they have barely aged. Hunger and cold mature them quickly, sharpening their faces, hollowing their eyes. Their questions have faded. They no longer ask why there isn't more food, or when the snow will stop, or when the world will turn green again. They sit close together most evenings, their heads resting on each other's shoulders, their breathing slow, their small bodies conserving what little energy remains. They do not cry. Crying wastes warmth. Even the smallest sounds have grown heavy. The creak of the roof beneath new snowfall. The distant crack of a branch surrendering to the ice. The faint moan of wind squeezing through the gaps in the wooden planks. The occasional hacking cough from your mother in the corner, softer now than before. Her breath rattles faintly most nights. You rise to check on her from time to time, adjusting the cloth wrapped around her thin frame, pressing your hand gently to her forehead. The fever remains. It has not grown, nor has it faded. Like everything else, it simply endures. You don't pray for her healing anymore. You don't pray much at all. Not because you've turned away from faith, but because even prayer now feels too heavy, too complicated, too uncertain. You whisper short words instead. Half prayers, half habits. More like breaths than petitions. Let her sleep. Let them eat. Let the roof hold. Because the great prayers and the ones for salvation, for renewal, for spring, feel too distant now. And your strength is spent on closer things. You sometimes imagine, as you stare into the flames late at night, that this winter has no end. That this is simply life now. Not a season, but a state. The entire world frozen beneath grey skies, locked forever in this narrow, muffled existence of breath and fire and slow starvation. The thought used to terrify you. Now it simply sits beside you, as familiar as the wind pressing against your door. The absurdity is that you still move. You still feed the fire. You still fetch the water. You still clear the roof. You still portion the meals. Even as the part of you that believes in an end grows quieter with each passing day. And winter watches. Not with eyes, not with malice, but with that silent, indifferent patience you've come to know so well. Waiting to see how many more days you can pull from yourself before there are none left to give. There comes a day, you don't mark which one, when you sit by the fire and realise something has shifted inside you. It's not panic, it's not fear, it's not even grief, it's quiet, it's hollow, it's surrender, but not the kind that comes with falling to your knees or crying out to the sky. It's the kind where you finally admit, this is bigger than you. You have done everything you can, and winter still remains. It always remains. You hear the wind scraping across the wooden walls like claws dragging through the snow. The sound no longer stirs you like it once did. You no longer glance toward the door each time the roof groans beneath a fresh drift. You no longer brace for what might come. You simply sit and breathe. The fire burns lower than usual tonight, but you make no move to feed it yet. You've grown used to letting it wither a little before reviving it. It's almost a ritual now, allowing the cold to inch closer before pushing it back again, for no reason except to remind yourself that you still can. You watch your wife sew by dim light. Her hands move automatically, the needle sliding through worn cloth that's already been mended too many times. The thread is thin, pulled from old garments long past saving. She sews not because the garment will hold, but because it's what her hands know how to do. Across the room, the children sleep. Their breathing is soft, their bodies curled like animals seeking warmth from one another. You remember faintly the sounds they once made, the games they played in summer, the laughter that once filled this space. Now their dreams are silent. Even in sleep they can serve. Your mother's breathing is lighter than usual tonight, shallow, fragile, barely there. You check her again, though you already know. The fever holds her like a second winter inside her frail body. She sleeps, or drifts near something that resembles sleep, her eyes flickering beneath closed lids, her lips occasionally forming words that have no voice. You pull the blanket higher across her shoulders and whisper the same small words you've whispered every night. Rest, just rest. There's nothing else to say. You've grown careful with your words these days. They cost energy. Even hope has become expensive. And beyond your walls, the cold continues its endless work. Snow falls, soft and steady. The drifts rise higher against your door. The trees groan beneath fresh weight. The roof creaks again, as it always does. But you do not fear it tonight. Not like before. Fear requires strength. Now you sit with winter, as one sits with an old companion who has grown too familiar to hate. You've learned its voice. The whistle through the rafters. The dull thump of ice collapsing from the eaves. The sudden cracks of distant branches snapping under frost. These are not surprises anymore. They are the sounds of your world. You've even learned winter's silences, the long stretches where nothing moves, where the entire world holds its breath, waiting. Those silences used to fill you with unease. Now you sit inside them without resistance, There is a strange comfort in surrendering to what you cannot change. You do not imagine spring tonight. You do not picture green fields, or warm rain, or birdsong. You know those things exist. But not here, not now. They belong to someone else. Somewhere far beyond this frozen shell you occupy. You do not mourn them. You simply accept their absence. Winter has taught you the final lesson. You endure not because you believe you will be rewarded. You endure not because you expect deliverance. You endure because endurance itself has become who you are. And perhaps you think that is enough, because tonight, as the fire shrinks lower, as the frost gathers once more on the inside of your windows, as your breath curls upward like smoke from the dying coals, you remain. You're still here. The cold has not taken you. Not yet. Not tonight. And tomorrow? You will wake. You will rise. You will shovel. You will feed. You will count the logs. You will mend what breaks. You will breathe again into the embers. Because that is what you do. Because that is what winter demands. Because that is survival. Because that is all there is. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Soft, endless, patient. The wind hums against the fragile walls, but you barely hear it now. It has become part of you, like breath, like pulse, like hunger. The fire flickers lower. The room dims. The breath of your children curls into faint wisps above their heads as they sleep, bundled together beneath worn cloth, their small chests rising and falling in rhythm. Your wife leans back slowly, her sewing resting in her lap, her eyes half closed but still watching the flames with the same silent determination that has carried her through every long night. Your mother's breathing drifts somewhere between this world and the next, each exhale softer, lighter. And you sit. You listen to the sounds you know by heart. The slow pop of wood splitting in the heat. The faint whistle of wind slipping between the planks. The distant groan of snow shifting on the roof. The occasional creak of frozen timbers bending under the quiet weight of another night. You do not speak. There is nothing to say. The hours slide forward, as they always do, measured not by clocks or candles, but by how long the fire lasts before another log is needed. You feel the cold pressing gently against your skin now, not as a threat, but as a familiar presence, one you have known longer than many people in your life. And somewhere out beyond the edge of the village, beneath the pale heavy sky, winter watches, silent, vast, waiting. But for now, you endure. The last ember glows softly, the last breath curls into the dark, and the night takes you, quietly, completely, without struggle, without sound, like the last candle burning out.